Years do not merely pass, they carve themselves into your bones. The ache that began in your 20s, a persistent companion, has settled deep into your joints, a permanent resident. Your back, once sturdy as an oak sapling, now bends like a willow in the wind, groaning with every hoist of the manure basket, every swing of the scythe. You watch your son, his shoulders broadening, his hands growing calloused and strong, taking the weight of the plow. People can be convinced, through the powerful narrative of divine will and eternal damnation, to participate willingly in their own impoverishment if the justification is powerful enough. Ask yourself, how much of yourself would you surrender, not to an army's sword, but to the whispers of an unseen judgment, if it promised a peace beyond the bitter cold? Is true faith born of unshakable conviction, or merely a convenient, if terrifying, shield against a world designed to keep you afraid and compliant? It's a stark, chilling reminder that the cherished freedoms we champion today often come at the cost of the guaranteed, if suffocating, belonging they knew. Ask yourself, in this constant gaze, this inescapable web of judgment and dependency, would you bend just enough to fit the mold, or would your spirit break under the weight of such profound public scrutiny? Was it a fear of the unknown that kept them in line, or the tangible terror of facing starvation, ostracized? Beyond the village gate, we chase infinite freedom over our time, over our schedules, over our very purpose. And yet, have we ever felt more anxious about how we use it? About the gnawing fear of wasting a single precious moment? Was the medieval soul truly less free? Or did relinquishing control of time grant them a peace we can barely fathom? Perhaps the biggest luxury they had was the belief that their time, their very breath, was not theirs to mismanage. They simply existed within the rhythm of eternity. We move for jobs, for love, for better weather, chasing horizons with a casualness that would stun your medieval mind. Our identity is portable, our connections stretching across continents. For you, identity is geography. To be cast out from this land is not like being fired from a job or simply moving towns. It's like being unplugged from life itself, a branch severed from the tree. It's a death sentence, a banishment to a world of outlaws and famine, where no one knows your name or the names of your grandfather's grandfathers. The day's relentless theater, the stern pronouncements of justice from the Lord, the whispered news of distant skirmishes, the hard-won meal of stewed roots and coarse bread, begins to unravel and dissolve. Around you, the shared, steady rhythm of breathing rises and falls, a collective hum of tired bodies finding what peace they can. It doesn't matter who you were in the light, a scullery maid with chapped hands, a young page practicing his letters, a weary man-at-arms polishing his dented helm. It is a primal whisper that reminds us our rational minds, for all their triumph and progress, haven't quite conquered our deeper instincts. We are still wired to see patterns, to seek stories in the shadows, to interpret the unknown not as an absence of data, but as a presence waiting to be named. In the quiet darkness, is it not still a reminder that the world can feel thin and the veil, at times, still easily torn? We, in our modern world, are drowning in information, a constant, overwhelming flood from every corner of the globe. Yet, are we any wiser? Our digital landscapes of fake news and algorithmic echo chambers demonstrate that we are still as susceptible to the power of the well-told rumor, still struggling to distinguish the vital message from the relentless noise. The medieval struggle for truth, measured in whispers and slow journeys, reminds us that the human need to know and the human propensity to believe remains a fragile, potent force. You see the women mending gambesons, the smith sharpening arrowheads, everyday tasks imbued with the shadow of potential violence. It's a society where the blessing of a priest before a skirmish is as essential as the smith's hammer. Because God, too, seems to favor the strong arm. We now live in societies that have largely outsourced this violence to professional armies and police forces, allowing us the profound luxury of forgetting that our own peace, our own order, is also bought and paid for by the readiness of others to fight, to die. This ceaseless scrutiny created a society where reputation was everything, a fragile tapestry woven from public opinion, easily unraveled by a single misstep or a malicious rumor, as swift and deadly as the plague passing through the village. It is a melancholic thought, this life lived so utterly for others, where the self was merely an echo of the collective gaze. Consider this. Today, we curate our lives on social media, performing a different kind of visibility. As the dust settled on the immediate crisis, one central, unresolved dilemma lingered like a persistent hum. The double-edged sword of volatile short-term capital flows, famously dubbed hot money. These rapid flows, seeking quick returns, could vanish even faster. Think of it. In 1997, countries like Thailand and South Korea experienced capital reversals of a scale rarely seen before, billions of dollars pulling out almost overnight, fundamentally deepening the crisis. This stark reality forced the policy trilemma into sharp focus. The world watches, initially with skepticism, some even with outright derision. There's a quirky, lesser-known detail in Mahathir's direct, unvarnished rhetoric. He famously lashed out at foreign speculators, once publicly labeling George Soros, the billionaire investor, a moron for his perceived role in the crisis. This wasn't just a policy decision. It was a personal challenge, a defiant stand against perceived external enemies. Today, economists continue to hotly debate whether Mahathir's radical approach was a stroke of strategic genius or a desperate roll of the dice that simply got lucky. This isn't just about cold, hard numbers. It's about a herd mentality. A major historical fact is how swiftly this fear spread. Within weeks of the bot's float, currencies in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Indonesia were hit by massive speculative attacks. It was a domino effect, accelerated by technology and the globalized financial system. A quirky detail here is how many of these portfolio managers, who had previously poured billions into these tiger economies, suddenly pulled their money out almost simultaneously, simply because everyone else was doing it. Or do we, in our pursuit of perfect sleep, lose something of the raw, visceral experience of truly being alive, of pushing the human body to its limits until even unconsciousness is a form of hard-won victory? You are handing over the physical product of your sweat and pain, the very stuff of your survival, to a man you saw every Sunday, who represented a God you were taught from infancy to fear and to obey. It was an act of profound, institutionalized injustice, yet it was meticulously framed as an act of piety, a holy duty, a key to salvation in the world to come. This system reveals how ideologies, religious or political, can normalize exploitation, making the unthinkable seem not just acceptable, but righteous. Your reputation here is your most valuable asset, more precious than the strong ox at your side, more vital than the last handful of coins in your purse. In a world without police, without formal institutions to arbitrate justice, beyond the Lord's sometimes distant decree, social exile is a slow, agonizing death sentence. To be cast out from the shared labor of the fields, from the protection of the collective, from the very well you now stand beside, is to face the wilderness, both literal and metaphorical, utterly alone. Our smartwatches buzz, our phones chime, our calendar alerts are our digital bells, but they call us to earthly masters, a Zoom meeting, a deadline, a social media post, an urgent email from a demanding client. The medieval bell called you to a single, celestial authority. This had a profound psychological effect. It meant that even the most wretched life was imbued with a sacred meaning, a piece of the divine tapestry. It provided an unshakable framework of purpose, a collective, spiritual bedrock that we, in our secular, self-defined age, desperately struggle to build for ourselves. You will work this land, bending your back to the fickle whims of the seasons, praying for a good harvest to stave off the gnawing hunger that always lurks at the edges of winter. And you will be buried in it, a quiet mound in the churchyard, returning to the very dust from which you sprang. Your entire world is this parish, a few square miles of mud, toil, and obligation, encircled by the familiar faces of kin and neighbor. This is the profound difference in the concept of place. For us, geography is a choice. The last torch sputters, its smoky breath hanging heavy in the great hall before succumbing entirely. One by one, the pinpricks of light vanish, leaving only the robust, defiant glow of the central hearth, a pulsating heart against the vast, encroaching darkness. You navigate by memory, your bare feet mapping the cold flagstones to your chosen spot. The rough wool of your blanket, scratchy against your skin, is a familiar, meager comfort. You pull it high, tucking it tight around your chin. Today, we confidently debunk these feelings with explanations of air pressure, structural drafts, and the natural settling of old architecture. We shine our electric lights into every corner, banishing the shadows where the medieval mind saw only lurking specters. But have we truly silenced the ghosts? Or have we merely stopped listening to the ancient murmurs of the human heart? That feeling of a presence in an old house, the inexplicable prickle on your skin, the sense of being watched, it remains a surprisingly universal human experience. A whisper could bring panic to a village, could condemn a witch, could start a blood feud that lasted generations. It is easy to romanticize this simplicity, this isolation, until you realize its sharp edges. The fear of the unknown was constant, fueled by a chronic lack of reliable information. Imagine the terror of a rumored plague, knowing it might be at your doorstep tomorrow, or might be a lie invented by a rival village to halt trade. The truth was often lost in the echo chamber of the village well, or twisted by the fears of a superstitious populace. You watch a young page, no older than your own son, struggling to lift a practiced shield, his face grimacing with effort. He, too, will be forged in this crucible of calculated aggression. For the villagers huddled within the outer walls, their existence is a stark reflection of this reality. Their prayers to Saint Michael are not merely for spiritual solace, but for tangible protection. Their superstitions about the harvest moon are intertwined with the fear of lean times, which often precede open conflict. To retreat was to weaken. To be forgotten was to invite rebellion or ruin. In an age without mirrors, where your reflection was a fleeting glimpse in a polished shield or a rippling puddle, what's clear is that the post-crisis landscape in South Korea looked dramatically different. Instead of cutting spending and raising interest rates, Malaysia pulls a move that sends shockwaves through the financial world. On September 1st, 1998, it imposes stringent capital controls and fixes its currency, the ringgit, to the US dollar at a rate of 3.80. Think of it like unplugging a rapidly crashing computer from the internet. The goal is to stop the immediate bleeding, to prevent money from fleeing the country and stabilize its volatile currency. This was a major historical fact, a bold, almost unthinkable step at a time when globalization and free capital flows were the undisputed dogma. As we saw with Thailand, the baht's dramatic fall wasn't an isolated incident. It was more like a fire alarm in a crowded theater. Panic, that most human of emotions, quickly became the primary driver, mutating into what economists call financial contagion. You see this mechanism unfold as international investors, spooked by Thailand's plight, began to scrutinize other Southeast Asian economies with a newfound, hypercritical eye. They looked for similar perceived weaknesses: high foreign debt, current account deficits, fixed exchange rates, and what they found, or thought they found, was enough to trigger a rapid withdrawal of capital. Yet in many profound ways, their lives were a constant, brutal fight against a nature that was trying to grind them down, hour by relentless hour. The irony is that in their constant battle for survival, the very act of resting became another skirmish, another uncomfortable compromise. Was this perpetual weariness a silent architect of their world, shaping their fatalism, their fervent prayers, their acceptance of short, brutal lives? This is a divine and feudal obligation, as natural and unavoidable as the relentless turn of the seasons, as the rain that nourishes the earth, or the bell that calls you to Mass. We, in our time, complain about taxes, but we pay them to an abstract entity, a government we rarely see, for services we largely take for granted. The tithe was intensely personal. We hold the power to block, to mute, to unfriend, to vanish from unwelcome gazes with a tap of a screen. You have no such options. Your community is assigned at birth, a fate etched in the very soil beneath your feet. This forced intimacy, this unyielding proximity to the same faces, generation after generation, creates a level of social accountability almost unimaginable in our fragmented world. It prevents the crushing weight of total loneliness, a constant hum of humanity always near, but it stifles individuality, shaping you into a mirror of what the village expects. This divine schedule sanctifies your labor, framing your relentless toil within a cosmic, eternal narrative. This brief pause is not rest, it is a reorientation, a forced moment of spiritual recalibration. It reminds you that your suffering has a purpose, even if you cannot see it through the dirt and the hunger. It offers a strange, almost chilling comfort. Your life, however miserable, is part of a plan grander than any king's ambition. In our world, time is a commodity. We manage it, save it, waste it, sell it. And beyond it, partially hidden by ancient trees that have seen more winters than your ancestors, is the manor house. You cannot see the Lord. Perhaps he sleeps late this day, but you feel his presence in the very soil beneath your feet, a weight as tangible as the stones of his keep. This land is not yours. You do not own it. In every meaningful way, it owns you. You were born on this land, cradled in a rough-spun blanket, beneath a roof of thatch and mud. Do we not still feel the pull of hierarchies, the invisible demands that shape our choices and our lives in ways we rarely acknowledge, just like the peasant who felt the king's shadow across his meager patch of turnips? Was this ancient system, for all its brutality, simply more honest about its demanding nature? Or was it, in its stark clarity, a form of freedom, knowing exactly who held the reins, even if they were out of sight? They give form to the ambient, nameless fears of the dark, offering a narrative for every creak of the floorboards, every shadow that seems to shift in the periphery of your vision. The castle, then, is not merely a physical structure of stone and timber. It is a landscape of memory and myth, each chamber, each stairwell, imbued with the echoes of lives lived and violently ended. It holds not just the living, but the whispers of the unquiet dead, a perpetual, silent court of ancestors. Your knowledge was constrained by what you could glimpse from the battlements, or what a rare traveler might impart over a shared meal. This made information a currency more precious than silver, more potent than any blade. A single letter, brought by a weary rider, held the power to ignite a war, or to seal a fragile peace between kingdoms. It meant that every rumor, every fragment of hearsay passed from mouth to ear in the dim light of a tavern, held immense, often terrifying, power. Peace is merely the interval between wars, a brief, fragile pause between the seasons of blood. This truth is ingrained in the very fabric of life, a deep-seated pragmatism that can seem jarring, even barbaric, to our modern sensibilities. A good harvest this year means little if next year's raiding party will burn it all. A man's worth, particularly a noble's, is intrinsically tied to his martial prowess, his ability to defend what is his, to take what is not. A castle's purpose is, above all, military, a stone fist clenched against a hostile world. It is a stage, and every moment lived within its stone walls is a meticulous performance of power and deference. The Lord's authority wasn't solely forged in the clash of steel or the force of his decrees, but in his constant, unavoidable visibility. He had to be seen to be believed in, his strength and justice enacted, performed daily for the garrison, the household, the visiting petitioners, and the silent. Judging whispers that flew like startled sparrows through the rafters. True privacy, the luxury of being for a quirky detail. Imagine the boardroom meetings. The older, stubborn chairman, used to unquestioned authority, suddenly found themselves being told by government officials how to run their multi-billion-dollar empires. The push for greater transparency and accountability meant implementing stricter accounting standards, making it harder to hide debt or manipulate books. Suddenly, the financial statements weren't just for the family's eyes. Economists continue to debate whether these forced reforms were truly effective in fostering long-term, sustainable corporate governance, or if they merely scratched the surface of deep-seated issues. As the Asian financial crisis deepened, and you saw other nations like Thailand and Indonesia grappling with the stringent austerity measures prescribed by the International Monetary Fund, Malaysia chose a dramatically different path. Under the fiery leadership of Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, the country made a high-stakes bet, directly defying global financial orthodoxy. You witness Mahathir, visibly frustrated by the IMF's one-size-fits-all approach and what he perceived as foreign interference, reject their advice outright. Suddenly, all those dollar-denominated loans, that looked manageable just days before became crushing burdens overnight. Economists still debate whether the Bank of Thailand had any truly viable escape routes left by this point, or if their prolonged defense only amplified the eventual pain. This constant, low-level sleep deprivation wasn't an anomaly. It was a defining feature of medieval life, contributing to a state of being that was likely perpetually weary. Imagine living always slightly dulled, your reactions a fraction slower, your patience thinner, your spirit more susceptible to the dark whispers of superstition that promised solace from unseen evils. We romanticize the natural lives of the past, imagining a harmony with cycles of sun and moon, a deeper connection to the earth. It feels less like a tax and more like an amputation, a living piece of your own body being taken, severed from the meager sustenance you've bled for. The sight is a chilling premonition, a ghost of hunger already haunting your doorway. Later, the Lord's reeve will come for his share, and what is left for you and your family to survive the cruel grip of winter feels terrifyingly, utterly small. There is no protest, no raised voice, no clenched fist. This is not some abstract levy collected by a distant crown. But if you step out of line, if you break an ancient custom or offend a powerful elder, their judgment is swift, quiet, and merciless. A cold shoulder here, a cutting remark there, a sudden exclusion from the next feast. You are never truly alone, for better and for worse. The notion of privacy, a luxury we barely register today, is an alien concept in this world. We crave community in our time, but we curate it with meticulous care. We choose our friends, our online groups, our neighborhoods. You bow your head, murmur a half-remembered paternoster, the ancient words a comfort or a rote obligation, depending on the weight on your soul that day. Your day is not measured in hours and minutes. Those concepts are vague, academic, useful perhaps to scholars in distant monasteries, but irrelevant here. Your day is segmented by these bells: prime at dawn, terce mid-morning, sext at noon, nones mid-afternoon, vespers at dusk, compline before sleep. Time does not belong to you, nor to the Lord whose fields you till. It belongs to God. The land is not a canvas for your ambition. It is the very fabric of your existence, woven with your sweat and blood. But the most imposing sight is not the land itself, fertile or fallow. It is the stone church on the hill, its spire a finger, blunt and ancient, pointing to a God who is always watching. Its bells, when they peal, resonate not just through the air, but through your bones, marking the hours, the holy days, the solemn passing of a soul. The weight of a kingdom rested not on impersonal institutions, but on the shifting sands of individual virtue and ambition, a reality as brutal as any famine. The unseen king's power was only as strong as the last loyal heart in his chain. Today, your loyalties are more abstract. You serve a company, a nation, an ideology. Your taxes go to a faceless bureaucracy. Your duty is to an invisible concept. But ask yourself, are these modern chains truly less binding? They are interwoven with the very fabric of existence, as much a part of the medieval understanding of the cosmos as the saints in their niches or the cycles of harvest and famine. This acceptance of the unseen gives shape to the world. Ghosts explain history, validating the stories of long-dead lords and the tragedies that stained their lineage. They enforce morality, For who would risk the wrath of a restless spirit by committing a wicked deed when its tormented soul might forever haunt your descendants? His voice, usually soft, carries with unexpected weight as he begins to read. News of a plague's shadow creeping from the south, a border skirmish in the north, a royal marriage proposal that could reshape alliances. Each word hangs in the air, a stone dropped into a still pond, its ripples spreading slowly, inevitably, altering the silent contours of your world. In an age without the instantaneous hum of screens, without wires carrying whispers across continents, your world was both impossibly vast and incredibly small. It is the grim, grinding preparation for the moment when the castle's primary function is activated. Every man down there, every muscle honed, every swing rehearsed, is a weapon, kept sharp and ready. The peace you experience inside these walls, the quiet hum of domestic life, the baking bread, the distant laughter of children, it is not a natural state. It is a violent one, maintained by the constant, chilling threat of superior violence. Survival in the medieval world is predicated on this state of readiness for conflict. You avert your eyes, not from fear, though fear is a constant undercurrent here, but from a deep, instinctual understanding of your place. To meet the Lord's gaze uninvited, to hold it for a breath too long, is not just disrespect. It is an act of defiance, a challenge to the very order of things, as audacious as blaming a saint for a bad harvest. The Great Hall, vast and echoing, is not a home in the sense you understand it. It was like realizing your favorite restaurant was actually a house of cards. The government, under immense pressure, particularly from the IMF, effectively declared it cleaning house time. A major historical event here was the Big Deal reforms, a series of government-mandated asset swaps and mergers aimed at rationalizing the Chable's sprawling businesses and reducing their debt. We saw the forced breakup of some overextended giants, most famously Daewoo, which collapsed under a mountain of debt, a truly seismic event for the nation. This wasn't just about financial health. It was about reshaping power. Economists continue to debate the precise extent to which crony capitalism versus external shocks or macroeconomic policy contributed to these crises. But what's undeniable is its power to warp market signals and erode public trust. On this pivotal day, with the nation's financial cupboard bare and the market's pressure unbearable, the central bank was forced to abandon the baht's fixed peg to the US dollar and allow it to float freely. The immediate aftermath was nothing short of catastrophic. The baht, unshackled, plunged instantly, losing over 20% of its value in a single day, and continuing its dizzying descent in the weeks that followed. This wasn't just a number on a screen. It was the moment the hidden vulnerabilities became a full-blown, undeniable crisis for every Thai citizen. We track it with glowing apps, optimize it with blackout curtains and humming white noise machines, and fret endlessly about achieving our prescribed 8 hours of restorative bliss. For you, the very concept of restorative sleep would be an alien luxury, a rich man's fantasy. Sleep is not a component of a wellness routine. It's a biological necessity you snatch whenever and wherever you can. It's often interrupted by cold, by hunger, by pain, by the raw sounds of your shared existence, by the gnawing fear that tomorrow might bring plague or famine. It is uncomfortable, shallow, and perpetually insufficient. But the deepest anxiety, the knot of dread that tightens with each sheaf bound, is not the toil itself. It's what comes after. One day, as the last golden stalks fall, the priest's cart arrives, its wooden wheels groaning under the weight of an unseen expectation. This is for the tithe, a tenth of your entire harvest, owed not to man, but to God, through his earthly representatives, the church. You watch, numb, as one of every 10 sheaves of wheat, each stalk bought with your blood and your aching muscles, is meticulously counted and loaded onto the cart. Your failures, your indiscretions, become the village's whispered entertainment, a fresh morsel for the daily gossip mill. This dense, interwoven community, a tight knot of families and shared histories, is at once your greatest source of strength and your most oppressive prison. If the harvest fails and hunger gnaws, they might share their precious grain, extending a lifeline woven from mutual dependence. If a lone wolf, driven bold by starvation, stalks the path to your door, they will come, a unified wave of pitchforks and rusty blades, a shared instinct for survival binding them. Suddenly, a sound cuts through the crisp morning air, clear and resonant. It is the church bell, its deep voice rolling over the fields, silencing the chirping birds and momentarily hushing the ceaseless grind of the millstone. It is the call to terse, the mid-morning prayer. You stop. Your hand, calloused from the plow handle, instinctively drops. Beside you, the reeve, who was just barking orders about a stray pig, also halts, his face softening for a fleeting second. All work ceases. Not just yours, but everyone's. A shared, silent communion descends upon the village. You step outside your hut, and the world expands. The air is sharp, a cold embrace that pulls a cough from your chest, smelling of damp earth, wood smoke clinging to the thatch, and the ever-present tang of manure. Before you lie the fields, stretching out in long, narrow strips that claw their way up gentle slopes, then disappear into the early morning mist. Your strip lies between your neighbors, identical and inescapable, each furrow a testament to countless hands, your own included, that have tilled this same soil for generations. This web of personal relationships was the medieval world's very glue, binding disparate lands and lords into something resembling order. It fostered a powerful sense of duty, a deep-seated understanding of one's place within a hierarchy, providing a kind of belonging. Yet it was also terrifyingly precarious. A single broken oath, a single act of betrayal by a lord seeking personal gain, could unravel an entire dukedom, plunge a region into chaos, or even bring down a king. The flickering torchlight, the strange noises that echo through the keep, the inexplicable cold, these are not phenomena to be scientifically analyzed. They are the restless sighs of the departed, the lingering presence of those who died with unfinished business, or perhaps those who died too horribly to rest. Ghosts are not the stuff of fables for bedtime stories. They are a fact of life, as real and omnipresent as the biting winter winds or the ever-present threat of plague. He pulls rein at the gate. The guards, usually stoic, stir with an unusual alertness. He dismounts stiffly, a scroll clutched in his gauntleted hand. This isn't just paper. It's a fragment of the outside world, painstakingly brought across days of arduous travel, through forests rumored to hold bandits, over rivers swollen with seasonal rains. The parchment, unsealed, is taken inside, into the flickering light of the great hall. You gather with the others, drawn by an invisible current of anticipation. The Lord Scribe, a thin man with sharp eyes, clears his throat. The clang of blunted steel on steel rings through the bailey below. It's a rhythmic, percussive heartbeat that vibrates through the very stone of the keep. A sound so constant you barely register it anymore, until the silence it leaves when it stops feels unnerving. You stand at a narrow arrow loop, watching them move. The knights, encased in 60 pounds of iron and leather. Their movements are practiced, brutal, exhausting. Dust rises from the compacted earth as a sword connects with a shield. A sharp crack, followed by a dull thud. This is not sport. It is rehearsal. He is a monolith of leather and authority, every inch of his broad frame exuding the unshakable weight of his lineage and his command. Beside him, the lady is a whisper of fine wool and quiet command, her presence as potent as his, though expressed in the subtle tilt of her head, the precise placement of her embroidered hem. They are the twin pillars upon which this entire precarious world rests, the living embodiments of divine right and earthly power. Having witnessed the immediate fallout of the Asian financial crisis, you might think the financial markets simply bounced back. But for countries like South Korea, the crisis wasn't just a blip. It was a wrecking ball for deeply entrenched corporate structures. This builds on what we covered earlier about the systemic vulnerabilities. In South Korea, the spotlight immediately swung to the chaebol, those massive, family-controlled conglomerates that dominated the economy. The crisis exposed their Achilles heel: excessive leverage, opaque accounting, and governance structures that prioritized family control over shareholder value. One lesser-known detail from that era was how some seemingly robust companies were found to have invested heavily in unrelated, highly speculative ventures, like a shoe manufacturer suddenly owning a ski resort simply due to the backing of a connected bank, rather than market logic. This creates the insidious problem of moral hazard, the implicit government guarantee. When financial institutions believe they are too big to fail, they take on excessive risks, knowing the state will step in to prevent collapse. It's like giving someone a get-out-of-jail-free card for bad decisions, incentivizing recklessness. You see, they had been burning through their foreign reserves at an astonishing rate, trying to prop up the bot's value against a relentless tide of short sellers and capital flight. It's almost hard to imagine the scale of desperation. In their desperate final defense, the Bank of Thailand had effectively sold off nearly all their liquid foreign reserves and even entered into billions in off-balance sheet forward contracts, essentially borrowing against the future to defend a present that was already collapsing. It was like trying to catch a waterfall in a teacup. Sleep is not a peaceful escape. It's a surrender, a grim capitulation to a body that can bear no more. It's the little death, a brief, troubled oblivion, a quiet descent into nothingness before the inevitable resurrection by the cold, unforgiving light of dawn. You close your eyes, not with the pleasant anticipation of rest, but with the stark resignation of a man who knows the struggle will begin again in a few short hours. A man who knows the sun cares nothing for his weariness. We medicalize sleep. The sun, a fiery anvil, hammers the fields, drawing sweat like an evil spirit from your brow. Your back screams with every swing of the scythe. Your hands, raw and blistered, grip the rough wood as if it's the only tether to sanity. The harvest, a dizzying whirlwind of dust and chaff, is the climax of your entire year, a frantic, back-breaking dance from dawn until the last sliver of light vanishes. This is not just labor. It is a desperate race against the coming cold. A brutal bargain with the earth for the right to breathe through winter's bite. "Wandering eye, that one," she whispers, though loud enough for half the village to catch. Seen her lingering by the cooper's shed more than once. Alara, pretending not to hear, dips her head lower, her face a sudden deep blush. Nearby, two men, brothers by blood, but rivals by nature, jab fingers at the earth, their argument over a boundary stone escalating from low grumbles to sharp shouts. Old grievances, passed down like heirloom tools, are aired for all to witness. There are no secrets here. Your triumphs are watched with a keen, often envious eye. It's a survival skill that echoes today in every toxic workplace, in every situation where one must smile at a boss they despise, knowing that outward conformity is the price of their daily bread. What becomes of the soul when the body learns only to obey? Ask yourself, when every sunrise promises only another battle for sustenance, what becomes of hope? And what sacrifices would you make? What moral lines would you blur simply to fill a child's empty stomach? This is not some abstract concept of nation or state. It is a deeply personal, sworn oath, a promise etched not just in legal charters, but in the very blood and bone of this society. You do not serve a land, you serve a man who serves a greater man, who serves the king. It is a cascading web of personal vows, each link dependent on the honor and strength of the individual who swore it. The surprising insight of this system, so alien to modern understanding, is its peculiar blend of strength and fragility. This, he murmurs, his eyes darting to the impenetrable shadows at the far end of the hall, is where Lord Alaric was betrayed, stabbed in the back by his own brother, right by that archway. He crosses himself, a swift, practiced motion. His spirit, they say, still walks here, a ghost, a memory trapped in the very stone. No one questions it, not truly. In this world, the veil between the living and the dead is not some abstract concept, but a tangible, often terrifying reality. Thin as gossamer in places like this, the thud of hooves on packed earth is your first clue. Not the familiar clatter of a local cart, but a rhythmic, desperate beat. You look up from mending a tear in your tunic, the needle paused mid-stitch. A figure emerges from the winding track, a horseman, his steed lathered. Ask yourself, in a world where survival hinged on every detail, was the true influence always found in the throne room, or was it often quietly residing in these logistical spaces, in the hands of those whose diligence kept the very world running? One thread, one measure of grain, one whispered instruction at a time. What unacknowledged pillars of society still hold our own world together, working in the quiet shadows, without fanfare or public acclaim? Her legacy is not carved in stone, but woven into the very fabric of existence. The low murmur of the great hall, a chorus of servants, squires, and petitioners, suddenly stills. It's not a shout that silences them, nor a sudden alarm, but a collective, almost instinctual understanding that the axis of their world is shifting. From the private solar, a space almost mythical in its seclusion, the Lord and Lady begin their descent. This is not mere movement. It is a procession, a gravity-defying glide down the worn stone steps. The Lord is a formidable shadow, even in the morning light, filtering through the high windows. This multilateral currency swap arrangement was essentially an Asian mutual aid pact, allowing member countries to access a pool of reserves in times of liquidity stress, bypassing traditional Western-dominated institutions. It was a clear signal of growing regional autonomy and self-reliance. Yet, economists continue to debate the long-term implications of these immense reserve accumulations. Are they truly optimal for global economic balance? Or do they represent capital that could be better deployed for development elsewhere? Regardless, the new architecture was undeniably built on a foundation of self-preservation and a refusal to be vulnerable again. Instead of funds flowing to the most innovative or efficient ventures, they're channeled through political influence or personal connections. This inevitably results in poor lending decisions, as risk assessment takes a back seat to relationships. A prime example is the Asian financial crisis of 1997 to 98, where countries like Thailand and Indonesia saw their economies crumble under the weight of non-performing loans, largely attributed to intertwined business and political elites. As we've seen, the pressure on the Thai baht had been building relentlessly, a slow-motion car crash that financial markets watched unfold. All those hidden vulnerabilities, the speculative real estate, the unhedged foreign debt, reached their definitive breaking point on July 2, 1997. This was the day the Bank of Thailand, after months of what can only be described as a valiant but ultimately futile defense, ran out of options. And in that simple, defiant act, the world was reborn, time and time again. They had no legacy carved in stone, but every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, built the world we now take for granted. Sleep does not come as a gentle usher, but as a reluctant captor. Your mind, a weary mill, grinds over the day's debts, the unplowed furrow, the ailing lamb, the sharp words from the reeve, the gnawing certainty that the larders will be emptier still by dawn. There is no ritual of winding down, no quiet moment to shed the day's anxieties. You are still encased in the rough-spun tunic, still caked in the mud and sweat of the fields. Perhaps the peasant, whose love was constantly forged in the furnace of profound impermanence, knew a depth of clinging and letting go we cannot fathom. You stop at the village well, the ox's heavy breath misting in the cool air, its flanks still warm from the day's plowing. The wooden bucket scrapes against the stone lip as you haul water, the rhythmic creak a familiar melody. Others are already here, their voices a low hum, a constant undercurrent to the bleating of a tethered goat and the distant peal of the vesper bells from the church. A woman, known more for her sharp tongue than her charitable heart, nudges her companion, her eyes darting towards young Elara by the trough. There is no HR department to complain to, no legal recourse to appeal, no anonymous complaint box to drop your grievances into. There is only the reeve on his horse and the chilling threat of swift, personal consequence. This stark reality teaches you the art of a hidden life, a profound and necessary survival skill. You learn to mask your thoughts, to swallow your anger, to perform outward obedience while your soul silently rebels. You become a master of the double life, of the internal monologue that screams defiance, even as your lips utter a respectful "I, master," ear in the harsh present. You count calories to see the sunset, to survive until the next dawn, to endure another turn of the seasons. This fundamental difference redefines the very meaning of a meal, transforming it from an act of indulgence or social gathering into an act of war, a relentless, daily battle against an unforgiving world that cares little for your comfort or your life. Was it merely hunger that drove their endless toil? Or did this daily struggle instill a resilience, a quiet dignity that echoes through the centuries? This lord, your liege, holds his lands not by right alone, but by the king's grace, by a chain of fealty that stretches from this very feast hall all the way to a distant, gilded throne. The taxes you pay, the days you labor in the fields, the sons who might be called to arms, it is all for him, the distant, almost mythical sovereign. You walk down a narrow, torch-lit corridor within the castle's ancient heart. The air grows heavy, thick, with the scent of damp stone and forgotten time. A sudden, inexplicable chill runs down your spine, deep enough to make your teeth chatter, a cold spot where no draft should be. The flame on your torch, usually a steady beacon, flickers wildly, dancing with unseen currents. Beside you, a grizzled servant, his face lined like a winter field, leans in close, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely cuts through the silence. We may have replaced that grand narrative with science or ideology, but the human need for a story that explains our place in the universe remains as powerful as ever, a hunger that still echoes in our modern souls. It was a subtle, indirect power, often unseen and rarely celebrated in the epic ballads sung by minstrels, but it was power nonetheless. This challenges our modern tendency to recognize only overt, public forms of authority. The king on his throne, the knight on his charger. Ask yourself, in a world where your daily survival hung on such clear, undeniable displays of power, would you fight against the invisible chains, or bend just enough to fit the mold, grateful for the crust you were given? The echo of those medieval fires still warms some and leaves others in the perpetual cold. This collective determination led directly to the massive accumulation of foreign exchange reserves. Imagine national piggy banks growing to epic, unprecedented scales. Governments, particularly in export-heavy nations like China, Japan, and South Korea, began hoarding dollars and other stable currencies. It was less about cold economic policy and more about a deeply ingrained, almost visceral fear of reliving the dependency and the perceived humiliation of the crisis years. This obsessive self-insurance meant that if another shock hit, they wouldn't need to knock on the IMF's door. Complementing this, new regional support mechanisms emerged, most notably the Chiang Mai Initiative. You've seen how speculative bubbles form, but what if the very system encourages them? Now, we unpack the accusation that often echoes through financial history: crony capitalism. It's not just a catchy phrase, it's a diagnosis of the crisis's deepest root cause. You delve into a web of close, often non-transparent relationships connecting governments, major banks, and large corporations. Imagine a game of Monopoly where certain players have a secret agreement, ensuring they always land on properties owned by their friends, getting cheap loans and guaranteed bailouts. This intricate dance leads to massive misallocation of capital. A quirky, lesser-known detail reveals how some analysts at these funds reportedly tracked the local cost of imported luxury goods or even the number of foreign cars on Bangkok streets, seeing these as early tangible signs of capital flight or a consumption bubble that official statistics hadn't yet captured. Economists continue to debate the precise point of no return for the baht's peg. But these persistent speculative pressures undeniably accelerated the crisis. It was like a game of financial chicken, and the speculators had far more fuel in their tank than the Thai central bank. They lived on a knife's edge in a world that sought to crush them at every turn, where a single bad harvest meant the difference between life and the shallow grave. Their names are lost to the wind, swallowed by the vast unwritten history of the forgotten. Yet, their stubborn hope, their refusal to simply lie down and die, is the invisible nutrient in the very soil we stand on. They feared the coming winter, its icy grip and empty larder. But still, every single spring, as surely as the sun rose, they bent their backs and planted the seeds. Finally, exhaustion overtakes you. You simply lie down on the straw pallet, still in the day's clothes. The scratch of coarse straw pricks your skin through the worn fabric, sharp as a guilty conscience. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth, wood smoke, and the close, unwashed scent of bodies. Beside you, your youngest child whimpers, a thin, reedy sound that pierces the quiet like a rusted nail. The ox in its shared stall grunts, a deep, resonant rumble, its warmth a small thing, fleeting comfort in the encroaching chill. Or did a necessary, almost imperceptible emotional distance serve as a shield, a cruel kindness against the inevitable, shattering heartbreak that loomed over every cradle? We, insulated by vaccines and antibiotics, by clean water and sterile hands, find it difficult to comprehend such raw, pervasive loss. Ask yourself, is our modern love, buffered from such unvarnished grief, truly stronger, or simply more fragile in its untested comfort, unprepared for the cruel whim of a cough in the night? Ask yourself, how would you sleep, knowing every shadow might hold a toothy grin, every whisper an ill intent, if you didn't have a ritual, a prayer, a charm to wield against the darkness? Our modern superstitions, knocking on wood, avoiding the number 13, throwing spilled salt over a shoulder, are the faint, vestigial echoes of this once total, all-encompassing reality, a quiet, melancholic testament to the human need for meaning, even when it means battling ghosts. You are a cog in a vast, indifferent machine, feeding a man you will never meet, who lives in a world of gilded halls and fine silks you cannot comprehend, a world as distant as the stars. This is the raw, unvarnished nature of power in your medieval life. Not the abstract power of distant governments or faceless corporations, but the immediate, personal power of one man over another, enforced by a swift kick or a lash across the back. Every faint whiff of a distant meal, every glimpse of a plump animal in the Lord's field is not mere temptation, but a vision of another reality, a painful whisper of a life beyond your grasp. The smell of baking bread from the Lord's grand kitchen, carried on the breeze, is a cruel irony, a fragrance of abundance you will never truly know. It creates a deep, cellular understanding of value, etched into the very bones. Today, in your distant future, people count calories to lose weight, to sculpt their bodies to an aesthetic ideal. The great hall is alight with torch flicker, the scent of roasting meat thick in the air. Your Lord, seated at the high table, lifts his silver goblet. "To the king," he booms, his voice echoing from the rafters. A chorus of rough voices replies, "The king." You echo it too, though you've never seen the king. He is a whisper on the wind, a name on parchment, a myth carved into the very stone of this castle. And yet, his presence is everywhere. Was their quiet resilience a lost art, or a forgotten necessity that we no longer understand? Relics, from a saint's fingerbone to a piece of the true cross, were not just venerated objects, but tangible shields against omnipresent evil. The priest, often the only literate man in a village, held terrifying power, the gatekeeper to salvation, his words binding or loosing souls. Was it pure faith that compelled them to kneel, to give their meager tithes, to endure suffering with stoic resignation? Or was it the chilling, visceral dread of what came after? The the fear of an eternity in darkness that truly saved them from despair, even as it sometimes crushed their spirit. We, in our clean, convenient modern world, often dismiss the women's work of the past as trivial, mundane, or merely domestic. Yet the management of a medieval castle household, with its hundreds of mouths to feed, bodies to clothe, and souls to keep ordered, was as complex as running a modern corporation, vulnerable to plague and the caprice of kings. The lady was its chief operating officer. Her competence determined whether the castle thrived or starved, whether its defenses were supplied with adequate provisions, and whether its very social fabric held together day after grueling day. We speak now of social mobility and meritocracy, of equal opportunities. Yet, consider our own world. The corner office with the panoramic view, the first-class airline seat with its cushioned comfort, the subtle difference in service one receives based on their perceived wealth. We have simply replaced the raw, tangible symbols of fire and bread with subtler, yet equally potent symbols of status. The trencher still passes, though now it's digital, and the best crumbs still go to those at the top. As the dust settled from the financial storms, you begin to notice a profound shift, especially across Asia. This wasn't just about recovery. It was about a deeply ingrained never-again mindset that reshaped the global financial architecture from the ground up. The sheer trauma of the 1997-98 Asian financial crisis, and particularly the perceived harshness and intrusiveness of the IMF's conditionalities, left an indelible mark on policymakers. Countries like South Korea and Thailand, having experienced deep economic pain and social unrest under externally imposed austerity measures, vowed to build their own financial fortresses. This vulnerability revealed the fragility behind rapid, debt-driven growth. To force the Bank of Thailand to abandon the peg, allowing them to buy back the now cheaper baht to repay their loans, pocketing the difference. A major historical fact often overlooked is that these initial probes weren't a single dramatic assault. They were a series of calculated jabs beginning in late 1996 and escalating into early 1997. We have gained unimaginable freedom, comfort, and knowledge. But in the process, have we misplaced the rugged resilience that is forged only in hardship? Only when your very breath depends on the next harvest? Have we lost the profound sense of belonging that comes from a shared, inescapable fate, where every villager's survival was intertwined with your own? The medieval peasant stands as a haunting testament to the human spirit's ability to endure the unendurable. It feels achingly ancient, deeply human, and almost tragically fragile. It reminds us that before we were readers or viewers, before knowledge was codified in paper and ink, we were listeners, gathered in the dark, seeking light not just from the fire, but from each other's voices. Ask yourself, in a world without records, without books, would your own truth be strong enough to persist? Or would it be lost to the hungry maw of forgetfulness, leaving only the echoed whispers of those who came before? The moon, a thin sliver through the smoke hole, casts long, dancing shadows, mimicking the shadows of fear in your mind. The fear of losing a child was not a tragic exception in this age of mud and wood and whispered prayers. It was a constant, gnawing presence, a background probability as certain as the return of winter. How did this reshape the very fabric of love, of attachment? Did it make the bonds more fierce, more desperate, clinging to each breath as if it were the last jewel in a pauper's hand? In a world with no scientific safety net, where life is brutally unpredictable, where a single bad harvest means starvation, where a fever can claim your child overnight, where the plague might sweep through and empty your village. It makes perfect, terrifying sense to believe that hidden forces are at play, orchestrating the chaos. It's a way of imposing a narrative, a sense of control onto a world that offers none. You understand with a clarity born of harsh experience that his report to the Lord can mean a crippling fine, a public beating, or even, for the most defiant, the loss of your land, your family's only anchor in a world of shifting sand. So you push the plow harder, your breath ragged, your face a mask of strained indifference. Your hands blister, your back screams, but your eyes remain fixed on the earth, never meeting his. It shapes their prayers for the rain, for the sun, for the stubborn fertility of the earth. This meal, this act of ingestion, is not for pleasure. It is pure, unadulterated fuel. The very notion of a culinary experience is an alien universe, a decadent fantasy beyond the realm of comprehension. Your relationship with food is purely functional, a direct, brutal transaction for energy, for the strength to pull the plow, to wield the scythe, to survive another unforgiving day. This constant, low-grade starvation, a persistent companion from cradle to grave, sharpens the senses to an almost painful degree. They had no grand legacy carved in polished marble, but every furrow they plowed, every prayer they whispered in terror of a bad harvest, every child they nursed through a fever, every whispered superstition to ward off evil, built the very foundations of the world we now take for granted. And in that quiet, enduring strength, we see a piece of ourselves, still echoing in the silence. We no longer have castle gates, yet every night we perform the same ancient ritual. We lock our doors, arm our security systems, and retreat into the controlled, glowing environment of our homes. The primal fear of the dark, of the unknown that lurks just outside our circle of light, has never truly left us, merely adapted its disguise. The ability to entertain oneself, and crucially, to entertain others, was a vital social currency, a mark of wit and charm. A good storyteller could earn his supper. A clever riddle master could earn respect. This forces us to confront a poignant truth. While we possess endless content, a vast ocean of information at our fingertips, perhaps we have sacrificed our capacity for genuine creativity born of quiet reflection, for deep, patient listening, or for the simple, shared, transformative act of telling a story in a firelit room where the only special effect is the light in someone's eyes. A plague sweeping through the village, leaving fields of unburied dead, divine punishment for unseen sins. You might offer a meager coin to a passing friar, not just out of charity, but as a desperate plea for intercession, a tiny investment in your soul's eternal fate. This deep-seated fear shaped rituals as profoundly as it shaped beliefs. Confession wasn't merely a repentance. It was a desperate purging of spiritual plague, a necessary act to avoid the eternal fires. She oversees the castle's vast stores, from sacks of grain harvested under a fickle sun to barrels of salted meat, ensuring the larders are full enough to outlast a siege or a famine. She directs the ceaseless spinning and weaving, clothing every soul from the lowliest stable boy to the most revered knight. She keeps the complex accounts of a massive household, a living corporation, all in her head, anticipating shortages, managing surpluses, and delegating without a formal hierarchy. It reinforces the great chain of being, the unwavering belief that God himself ordained this rigid hierarchy, from the humblest stable boy to the most powerful king. To question it, even in the silent chambers of your own mind, is to question God's divine plan, to invite damnation in a world where fear of hell was as real as the ache in your empty stomach. Was it faith that saved them, or the sheer, crushing weight of a fear so profound it bent minds as surely as famine bent bodies? Still, economists continue to debate whether the speed and severity of these structural reforms, while necessary, inflicted undue short-term pain, or if their swift execution was precisely what laid the foundation for future resilience and growth. The situation became so dire that in a major historical event, South Korea had to turn to the International Monetary Fund for a record-breaking bailout. In a truly remarkable, lesser-known detail, ordinary citizens, from housewives to students, even lined up to donate their personal gold heirlooms and jewelry to the government, a poignant effort to help the nation pay off its crushing foreign debt. Economists continue to debate whether the sheer scale of the chaeble's foreign debt or the sudden swift loss of confidence by international lenders was the primary catalyst for the won's dramatic collapse. Their analysis was cold and calculated. Thailand's foreign reserves, while appearing adequate to the casual observer, were simply insufficient to defend the baht against a sustained, coordinated attack. The mechanics of such a speculative currency attack are quite straightforward, yet devastating. Imagine them as financial snipers. These funds would borrow massive amounts of Thai baht, then immediately sell that baht for US dollars in the open market. This act floods the market with baht, naturally driving its value down against the dollar. Their ultimate goal, ask yourself, would you, given no choice, bend just enough to fit that mold, or would the constant, demanding certainty shatter you? Have we really evolved, or have we just rebranded survival? We've traded the gnawing fear of famine for the insidious anxiety of the stock market. We've swapped the chilling fear of the devil's breath in the night for the dread of meaninglessness that whispers in the quiet hours. We have replaced the tyranny of the Lord's harsh decree with the subtler but no less demanding tyranny of the algorithm and the relentless 24-hour news cycle. It was the collective unconscious made audible, shaping every belief, from the protective power of a saint's relic to the chilling fear of a witch's curse. These oral traditions, honed over centuries, created a shared understanding of good and evil, success and failure, and the very order of the cosmos. We consume stories constantly today, through endless streams and screens, often a passive individual act, tailored to our solitary preferences. But imagine the profound intimacy, the shared breath, the synchronous wonder of a family huddled together, weaving their reality from shared words and shared imagination. Now, as your child gasps for air, the intellectual parsing of God's will or humoral imbalance means nothing. You are a peasant, bound by the seasons and the soil, but utterly helpless against the invisible enemy that steals the breath from your own blood. There is no physician, no remedy beyond the few herbs and prayers that have failed before. This confrontation with illness is not mediated by the distant promises of science or the comforting statistics of survival rates. It is a raw, direct duel with mortality, an intimate dance with the impotence of human will. For those who will come centuries after you, a sudden chill in the air is merely a drop in temperature, a scientific measurable. For you, it could be the silent, icy passing of a ghost or the breath of a malevolent sprite. They will seek rational, testable explanations for every misfortune. You seek spiritual causes for every cough, every failed crop, every stillbirth. This is not ignorance in your time. It is a different operating system for reality, a highly sophisticated, if unseen, network of cause and effect, a moment of rest, a pause to wipe the grime from your brow, is not seen as human need, but as sloth, a punishable laziness. A slower pace is defiance, a direct challenge to the authority he embodies. You feel a deep, silent, and powerless hatred for him, a resentment that simmers just beneath the surface, like the stagnant water in a midsummer ditch. But beneath the hatred, a colder, sharper fear coils in your gut. They understand the unspoken laws of this house, carved deeper than any commandment. The workers eat first, and they eat most. Their tiny hands, already calloused from chores, clutch their portions with fierce concentration. Wasting food isn't merely a sin against God, a transgression against divine providence. It's a visceral, unforgivable sin against tomorrow. A single spilled grain, a forgotten crust, could mean the difference between seeing the next harvest and succumbing to the cough that rattles in the depths of winter. This quiet morality, forged in the crucible of constant scarcity, dictates every choice, every movement. The fundamental human drama remains utterly unchanged across 1,000 years, a fragile, fleeting life lived within a structure we ourselves created, but can no longer truly control. The stone does not remember your name, nor does the server farm. It only remembers the silence that follows. What they teach us, these vanished people, is not just about a bygone age, but about ourselves. They remind us that the human spirit, fragile yet persistent, always seeks order, always seeks meaning, even within the confines of fear and faith, and the brutal logic of survival. It wasn't just about tangible threats. It was about drawing a line against the unseen, against the spiritual wilderness. The fear of what lurked beyond the light was as real, if not more so, than the fear of a raiding party. This daily ritual, born of necessity, reinforced a cosmology where evil was a palpable entity that could be, if not banished, at least physically excluded by a strong enough gate and a whispered prayer. Was it faith that sealed the gate, or fear of what came after? In our overstimulated world, where every pocket holds a portal to endless content, it's almost impossible to grasp the sheer, unyielding lack of distraction that defined medieval life. Yet, this very void, this profound absence, wasn't merely a burden, it was a forge. It honed different human faculties, sharpening skills that atrophy in our modern age. Memory, for instance, was a prized skill, not just for scholars, but for everyone. Stories, songs, family histories, and even practical knowledge had to be held, cherished, and replayed within the mind, for there was no external hard drive. Every bell chime from the distant abbey, every mumbled prayer for a bountiful harvest or a safe birth, was an acknowledgement of this invisible war. This absolute certainty, so foreign to our skeptical age, provided both immense comfort and profound terror. It gave life meaning and purpose, offering the hope of eternal salvation. But it also justified the most brutal persecutions and stifled any inquiry that dared to question its divine narrative. To live was to constantly balance on the precipice of heaven and hell. A poor harvest? God's displeasure. For here, within these sunlit walls, she is not merely a symbol of noble grace or a vessel for noble heirs. She is the living, breathing heart of the household, a manager of a complexity few modern minds could grasp without a spreadsheet. Her power is not wielded with a sword, nor announced by trumpets from the battlements. It is held in the jingle of her keys, the meticulous entries of her mental ledgers, and the sharp, discerning eye that misses nothing. This isn't sustenance. It is a ritual of submission, a daily lesson in your place within this grand, brutal machine. Here, status is not an abstract concept. It is written in every mouthful of food, every inch of proximity to the roaring fire. Your worth is measured by the quality of the bread you are given, the warmth you are allowed to feel, the very air you are permitted to breathe. This daily, casual cruelty isn't personal. No one here wishes you ill. It is structural, as essential to the castle's function as its moat and its towering, impassive walls. They also undertook the painful process of restructuring massive corporate debt, forcing once powerful companies to shed assets and rethink their operations. A lesser-known, yet telling detail from this era involves the creation of special asset management companies, or AMCs. These entities became veritable financial graveyards, tasked with absorbing mountains of toxic debt and repossessed assets. Everything from half-built skyscrapers to fleets of idle fishing boats. It was an unprecedented act of economic spring cleaning. They borrowed aggressively, often short-term and in foreign currencies, to diversify into everything from shipbuilding to semiconductors, pushing for global market share. It was like a corporate game of Jenga, stacking debt higher and higher, all built on the assumption that global credit would always be cheap and plentiful. But when credit markets froze and foreign lenders, spooked by the regional instability, started pulling their money out, that Jenga tower began to sway violently. The South Korean won plummeted, making those dollar-denominated debts feel like trying to pay a credit card bill with monopoly money. As we previously discussed, the internal pressures on Thailand's economy were mounting, but it wasn't long before external forces began to circle. This is where the narrative shifts, as you witness the first active, aggressive challenge to the system. International hedge funds and other astute speculators, sensing weakness, began to test the Thai baht's long-standing peg to the US dollar. For these global players, a fixed exchange rate is less a point of stability and more a target, especially when a nation's economic fundamentals start to look wobbly. You knew what God demanded of you, a path laid clear by the village priest and the solemn toll of the bells. You knew what the land required of you, sweat, sacrifice, and the patient hand that knew when to sow and when to reap. You knew what your family needed from you, for their survival was your survival. Your path was not a choice. It was a furrow, plowed for you from birth to death, a deeply worn track in the ancient earth. There was no question of purpose, only of endurance. The shared words, like the shared pottage you just consumed, bind you together, a flimsy but essential shield against the plague, the famine, the raiding band, and the even more ancient terrors that lurk in the whispers of the wind. In an age before mass media, before literacy was a common luxury, storytelling wasn't just entertainment. It was a vital technology. It was how history was remembered, how morals were taught, and how a community defined itself. He spoke of eternal rest, of tiny angels in heaven, but such words offer little balm to a heart cleaved by loss. The village healer, old Alara, with her gnarled hands and eyes like ancient walnuts, offered a different truth and balance of the humors, or perhaps a lingering curse from an ill-wisher who envied your harvest. She brewed a bitter decoction of willow bark and mallow, muttered forgotten prayers over a steaming bowl, but the fever, a tireless, burning tide, had claimed them nonetheless. The boundary between Christian faith and pagan superstition is not a line, but a porous, misty landscape, where a heartfelt prayer to Saint Sebastian for protection from plague might be followed by leaving a bowl of fresh milk at the threshold for the good folk, just to be safe. You don't question the contradictions. You simply do what is necessary, appeasing all the powers, seen and unseen, that govern your fate. Why risk eternal damnation or a blighted harvest? For the sake of logical consistency, this reveals a mind that lives in a constant, delicate negotiation with the supernatural. His worn leather tunic is a touch finer, his horse better fed, and in his hand he carries a tally stick, its notched edges marking your days of boon work, the grueling, unpaid labor you owe the Lord for the privilege of farming your own meager strip of land. You know that every scratch on that stick represents your sweat, your aching muscles, your stolen time. His gaze is a physical weight pressing down on your shoulders as you push the heavy wooden plow. A gritty, warm mass that coats your empty stomach, a heavy, almost medicinal comfort. You eat from a shared wooden bowl, the grain worn smooth by generations of hands, using a chunk of hard, dark bread baked days ago to scoop up the slop. Each mouthful is a victory, a small, hard-won skirmish against the gnawing hunger that is not an occasional discomfort, but the baseline, the very hum of your existence. The children, their eyes wide and solemn in the flickering light. Eat quickly, silently. We still serve unseen kings, the algorithms that shape our thoughts, the market forces that dictate our worth, the ideologies that demand our unquestioning fealty. We build these elaborate modern structures to give our lives meaning, to keep the chaos of existence at bay, telling ourselves with every click and every climb that we are finally free. But in the dead of night, when the screens dim and the distractions fall away, when the modern echoes finally fade, can we not sometimes feel the cold, familiar weight of the walls we have built around ourselves? But just beyond the gate, in the impenetrable dark, stretches the primeval chaos. This is the realm of the wolf, whose howl might carry on the wind, of the outlaw, desperate and unseen, and of the demons, those malevolent spirits of forest and fen, born of shadow and rumor, always hungry. Your very existence is defined by this stark binary, the ordered, fire-lit inside versus the vast, dangerous outside. The surprising insight is how deeply this physical act of sealing the gates burrowed into the collective psyche, shaping not just their actions, but their very understanding of reality. His performance is a communal balm, a shared escape from the crushing monotony, holding everyone wrapped, their faces illuminated by the firelight, their memories etched with every verse. When no minstrel graces the hall, the solace is found in simpler things, the clatter of dice in a leather cup, fortunes won and lost on a throw, the silent, strategic battle of chess pieces across a crudely carved board. Or, most often, it is the voice of a seasoned elder, recounting ancient sagas passed down through generations. His words, a tapestry woven from memory, imagination, and shared history. The fear of damnation is more real than any invading army, more potent than hunger, more chilling than the deepest winter. This wasn't a choice of lifestyle. It was the operating system of the medieval mind. Faith explained everything. The sun's persistent rise, the sudden sickness of a child, the outcome of a battle where blood soaked the earth. The chapel, with its sturdy walls and hallowed ground, was the castle's spiritual fortress, a desperate defense against the demonic chaos believed to lurk just beyond the thin veil of the visible world, waiting to seize a soul. A lady sits, her posture erect even as her fingers fly, coaxing a new pattern onto a tapestry. Around her, a quiet constellation of her ladies-in-waiting mirrors her industry, their needles glinting like tiny, disciplined stars. She looks up as you enter. Her eyes, though assessing, hold a certain serene intensity. This is no idle hobby. Her needlepoint, intricate and deliberate, is a record, a story told in thread, perhaps of a hunt, a wedding, or even a lineage. It is a visible manifestation of the unseen narratives she constantly weaves, holds, and maintains. The rough-hewn trencher, laden with hard, dark bread, makes its slow, inexorable journey down the line of waiting hands. The master-at-arms tears away the softer, inner crumb for himself. The squires, their eyes wide with hunger and calculation, claim the next best pieces. By the time it reaches you, only the crust remains, thick and unyielding, a weapon more than a meal. You clench it, your knuckles white, and dip it into a communal cup of thin, sour ale. Its taste, a bitter echo of the morning's chill. This sudden affordability made exports skyrocket, bringing much-needed foreign currency back in and kickstarting industrial production. But this wasn't just a lucky break from currency fluctuations. The second, and arguably more vital engine, involved the incredibly difficult structural reforms. Imagine trying to repair a house with termites. You don't just paint over the damage. You tear out the rotten beams. That's what it felt like. Governments had to make tough calls, like closing insolvent banks, a major historical fact of this period, as it purged the financial system of its weakest links. As the financial tremors spread across Southeast Asia, you then see the crisis reaching South Korea, the world's 11th largest economy at the time. Here, the unique vulnerability isn't just a speculative real estate bubble, but something deeply embedded in their economic model, the chaebol. These aren't just big companies. Think of them as massive, sprawling, family-owned industrial conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG. For decades, their relentless, debt-fueled expansion was the engine of South Korea's miracle on the Han River. Economists continue to debate whether the sheer volume of this unhedged debt or the rigidity of the currency pegs was the primary catalyst. But either way, this unsustainable dance was setting the stage for a spectacular fall. A life of crushing labor with no hope of advancement lived under the perpetual shadow of sickness, famine, and an unforgiving God whose wrath felt as tangible as the winter frost. It would be easy to dismiss it as a nightmare from which humanity thankfully awoke. And yet, that is too simple. Within that brutal framework was a different kind of meaning, a meaning we have perhaps lost. It was the profound, unshakable certainty of your place in the cosmos. Or perhaps it's an older tale, a fable of a cunning fox outsmarting a foolish giant, or a peasant outwitting a greedy lord, echoing the small triumphs and bitter ironies of your own days. These aren't just tales. They are the very fabric of your reality. The flickering firelight transforms your smoky, earthen hut into a grand theater, a sanctuary from the menacing, unyielding dark that presses in from all sides. You remember the last time this sound echoed through the hut. It was your firstborn, little Agnes, her breath growing shallower with each passing hour, her skin hot as a forge. Then, 2 winters later, young Thomas, taken by the flux, his small body a skeletal map of suffering. Both buried in the cold earth of the churchyard, their names etched not on stone, but on the raw, bleeding tissue of your memory. The priest had said it was God's will, a test of your faith, a divine pruning of the earthly vine. But later, as the sun dips below the ancient oak line, it is the old woman, her face a roadmap of hard seasons, who speaks of fairies who steal unbaptized babes from their cradles, of spirits in the gnarled roots of those very oaks, of the undeniable power of cold iron to ward off evil that no holy water can touch. From the edge of the field, a man on horseback watches. This is the reeve, the Lord's enforcer. His shadow stretches long and thin across the newly turned earth, a dark omen on a sun-drenched day. He is one of you, born of this same soil, perhaps even from this very village, but elevated. The air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp earth, soon carries the faint, comforting promise of warmth. Soon, a small dented pot begins to bubble over the flame, a metallic groan accompanying the thin, watery steam that rises. This is breakfast, the breaking of the long night's fast. Pottage, a humble, unyielding concoction of oats, barley, and whatever withered roots or scraps of greens were salvaged from the day before. There is no flavor to speak of, no delicate notes or subtle spices, only texture. They whisper no more, those voices, but the stone remembers their collective struggle. And so, we must ask ourselves, peering back across this chasm of time, have we truly evolved from the shadows they cast? Or have we merely built more comfortable castles around ourselves? We have our digital fortresses now, impenetrable with passwords and firewalls. We navigate our corporate hierarchies, our social protocols, just as rigidly as they did the manor house. We lock our gates with complex algorithms and guard our status with meticulously curated profiles. The drawbridge is raised, a bridge to nowhere, hovering uselessly over the moat's black water. You are a self-contained island, ringed by stone, isolated in a vast, dark sea of night. The air inside the walls, even in the cold, feels warmer, safer, imbued with the faint scent of wood smoke and human presence. This divide is absolute. Inside these walls, illuminated by the flickering comfort of hearth fires and the scarce, precious candles, the rules of man and God hold sway. Here, children sleep, prayers are whispered, and the routines of survival unfold under a watchful, if distant, celestial eye. You listen to the crackle of the logs, the distant snore of a guard, the frantic scuttling of a mouse, and you yearn for something, anything, to break the quiet. A traveling minstrel is a godsend, his arrival heralded like the first warm winds of spring after a bitter winter. His voice, strong and clear, becomes a lifeline, spinning tales of epic battles where heroes clash and blood flows like rivers, or weaving tragic love stories that wrench tears from the toughest men. You slip into the castle's chapel. The air changes instantly. It's cool, still, and smells of old stone, incense, and wax. Light, filtered through a small stained glass window, paints a jewel of color on the floor, a single vibrant splash in the muted gray. In here, the earthly hierarchy of the great hall dissolves. The Lord, who moments ago commanded lives and lands, kneels now, his head bowed, and for a moment, he is as small as you are before the terrifying, all-seeing gaze of God. You carry the basket, heavy with mending, through the castle's winding passages. The stone walls whisper cold secrets, but as you ascend, a different warmth begins to diffuse. Sunlight, not hearthfire. You push open the heavy oak door to the solar, the lady's private chamber, and it is as if the very air exhales. This is the quietest place in the entire fortress, a sanctuary where the clang of steel and the shouts from the bailey cannot penetrate. Here, golden shafts of light dance across the polished floorboards, illuminating motes of dust and the rhythmic, silent industry within. This is the castle's true heartbeat, not the Lord's grand entrance or the ringing of the chapel bells. Only when the fire, the ancient promise of warmth and life, is reborn, does this silent, unforgiving world truly begin. You feel the first lick of warmth on your face, a fleeting blessing that quickly dissipates into the vast hall, a luxury reserved for those closer to the flames. As the pre-dawn light bleeds an anemic gray through narrow slits, the social order asserts itself, stark and unyielding. The lowest eat last, or perhaps not at all. As the dust began to settle from the tumultuous late 1990s, the grim task of rebuilding commenced from 1999 onward. The landscape was one of profound devastation, yet within the rubble lay the seeds of a slow, painful recovery. You start to notice two powerful engines driving this turnaround, working in tandem, though sometimes at odds. First, there was the competitive boost to exports. With currencies massively devalued, goods and services from these economies became incredibly cheap on the global market, like a countrywide fire sale for international buyers. While the IMF insisted these measures were vital medicine to restore confidence, economists continue to debate whether the severity of these conditions unnecessarily deepened and prolonged the immediate economic pain for millions. They undeniably laid the groundwork for future recovery. Lured by seemingly lower interest rates abroad, local businesses borrowed massive amounts, often in US dollars, and critically, without hedging, meaning they didn't protect themselves against currency fluctuations. This was akin to borrowing a large sum in Japanese yen for a home renovation in the US, assuming the yen-dollar exchange rate would never move. A quirky, lesser-known detail from this era was how many of these short-term loans financed speculative real estate ventures, including a surprising number of luxury golf courses across the region, which would later stand eerily empty as the crisis hit. So you stand in this imagined past, covered in the mud and sweat of a 1,000-year-old day. The imagined chill of a drafty hovel still clings to your bones. The phantom ache of unending labor pulses in your limbs. Was this life a relentless, brutish misery? By our standards, unequivocally, yes. It was a life bounded by pain that medicine could not ease, by hunger that gnawed at the gut, and by superstition that filled every shadow with dread. This is the hour of stories. There is no book in this house, No printed word save perhaps a single, treasured page from a missal kept by the village priest. There is only memory, passed from breath to breath, ear to ear, across generations. Perhaps tonight, your elder recounts a Bible story, full of miracles and wrathful angels, a vivid drama of heaven and hell that grounds your fears and aspirations. The small, dry cough tears through the quiet of the night, a sound as familiar and dreaded as the clang of the curfew bell. It's your youngest, barely 5 summers old, tucked beside you on the straw pallet near the dying embers of the hearth. The cough comes again, persistent, rattling, a dry bark that scrapes against the raw edges of your heart. A knot of cold dread tightens in your stomach, like a winter noose. This isn't just a cough. It's the insidious whisper of the reaper, a familiar shadow that has danced too often in your humble home. He mirrors your gesture. This world you inhabit is not the sterile, material plane of science that will one day be. It is an enchanted place, teeming with unseen forces, both benevolent and malevolent, their presence as real as the ache in your back at dusk. The priest in the village church speaks of God and the devil, of angels and demons, warring for your immortal soul. You listen, you kneel, you cross yourself. Your faith is not an intellectual assent, but a visceral need, a hope whispered to the soil itself that your unending effort will somehow be enough to keep the cold and hunger at bay. Was it the fear of failing the earth, or the fear of failing your family, that truly drove them? Or perhaps, was it simply the instinct to continue, long after hope had given way to sheer, unthinking persistence? You rise, your joints cracking a protest like old timbers settling in the pre-dawn chill. The floor is cold, packed earth, a constant reminder of the world's indifferent embrace. Beside you, the rustle of straw as your wife is already moving, a shadow in the gray gloom, her silent industry a testament to the ceaseless rhythm of their lives. She coaxes a few embers back to life from the hearth, a tiny, precious spark in the vast, consuming darkness, feeding them precious twigs gathered from the meager hedgerows. It was fueled by an unwavering faith in divine order and by an ever-present, gnawing fear. Fear of damnation, fear of starvation during a lean harvest, fear of the unknown that lurked beyond the church bells. And it was lubricated, this colossal mechanism, by the quiet, often unspoken acceptance of one's place, one's fate, within its grand design. Its purpose was to endure, and it did for centuries, long after the names of those who lived and died within its shadow were utterly forgotten, swallowed by the very silence it now holds. The massive wooden timbers of the great gates, thick as an oak forest, swing slowly inward, accompanied by the shriek and grind of the portcullis, a jagged maw of iron teeth, slowly rising to prepare for its descent. The daily ritual of the gates closing is more than just a matter of security. It is the fundamental redefinition of the world. With a final, thunderous boom that rattles your teeth and reverberates deep in your bones, the gate settles into its final, locked position. The castle, your world, is now sealed. The true war, after the day's back-breaking labor or the castle's ceaseless demands, often begins when the sun finally surrenders. It is not fought with sword and shield, but against the insidious, creeping tendrils of profound boredom. It's a silence that presses in, a void demanding to be filled. For the lord and lady, the knights and squires, the long hours stretching from dusk to dawn are an open maw, threatening to swallow wit and sanity whole. Ask yourself, When the history books are written, do we praise the feast or the hands that brought it forth from the fire? Is the true strength of a society found in its gilded halls, or in the very dirt and blood of its foundational labor? In this kitchen, you feel the raw, undeniable truth of survival, unvarnished by prayer or noble lineage. It is the hunger that shapes morality, the constant churning need that dictates the day. We haven't eliminated our messes. We've simply become more sophisticated, more artful in how we hide them. The medieval castle's stench, though more potent, was perhaps more honest. It laid bare the realities of existence. Now, our illusions are so finely woven, we often mistake the perfume for purity. Ask yourself, how much of your perceived cleanliness, your order, is merely a carefully constructed lie? And what forgotten, primal stenches still cling to the deepest corners of your own well-perfumed castle? The castle groans awake, not with trumpets, but with the shiver of a child. Young Thomas, barely a decade old, his small hands already gnarled by the chill of 1,000 dawns, scurries towards the cavernous hearth. His breath plumes in the frigid air, a fleeting ghost against the stone. Tonight, the embers sleep deep. He kneels, a desperate priest before a cold altar, coaxing life from ashes. His fingers, numb and clumsy, prod and blow, a whisper of a prayer accompanying each fragile spark. Understanding the intricate dance between policy, markets, and human behavior is key to anticipating and mitigating future economic storms. And maybe, just maybe, these recurring financial storms tell us more about human nature than about money itself. Today, economists continue to debate whether the austerity measures truly expedited recovery or prolonged the suffering. The human cost, however, is undeniable, etched into the collective memory of a generation. On top of that, rapid structural reforms were mandated, pushing for the privatization of state-owned enterprises and swift deregulation of financial markets. It was a bitter pill to swallow for many. In a truly remarkable, albeit quirky, display of national resolve, South Korean citizens actually launched a nationwide campaign, donating personal gold, wedding rings, heirlooms, even gold medals, to help the government repay its massive IMF debt. Can you imagine the collective sacrifice, the depth of... As the U.S. economy boomed in the mid-90s, its currency strengthened significantly. This made Asian exports more expensive for global buyers, while imports into these countries became cheaper, further ballooning those already alarming current account deficits. It was like trying to sell gourmet coffee at a premium when the global market was suddenly flooded with cheaper, equally good alternatives. The final ingredient in this financial cocktail was the explosion of unhedged, short-term foreign currency debt accumulated by private corporations and finance companies. It is in the sacrifices made, the quiet suffering borne, the relentless, uncelebrated effort poured into the continuation of life itself. You are not a forgotten ripple. You are the very current. You are the deep, unseen root system that feeds the visible tree, sustaining life without ever seeing the blossom your hidden labor makes possible. Was your life less meaningful for its lack of fanfare, for its ultimate anonymity? Or does it hold a truth about human purpose that we, in our desperate search for individual permanence, have entirely forgotten? The fire is built up. It breathes life into the heart of your tiny universe, a defiant orange bloom against the engulfing night. Its glow, the only light, dances with mischievous shadows across the rough-hewn walls of your cramped hut, making familiar corners seem vast and mysterious. You huddle closer, the chill of the outside world and the deeper chill of a life constantly on the brink, seeping from your bones as you soak in its blessed warmth. Beside you, your youngest, miraculously, sleeps soundly, his face illuminated by the flickering light, momentarily free from the cough that haunts his days. Ask yourself, if your very existence depended on this ceaseless, uncelebrated grind, would you find a way to endure, or would the weight of its quiet anonymity crush your spirit? As you work in the fields, the earth stubborn beneath your calloused hands, a crow lands on a nearby fence post and caws, not once, but 3 piercing times. The sound cuts through the hum of insects, sharper than a winter wind. You pause, the heavy hoe still, and exchange a silent, knowing look with your son, who has also stopped his digging. Is it a warning? An ill omen for the harvest? Or perhaps a scout for something darker, something unseen? Without a word, your hand instinctively rises, fingers forming the sign against the evil eye, discreetly, almost unconsciously. Survival strips life down to its most brutal mechanics, reducing the universe to a field of mud and the unyielding fight against it. Your prayers are not for salvation in the afterlife, but for a sturdy plowshare, for the ox's continued health, for a son who doesn't falter. For if they fail, all else fails. There is a profound, quiet melancholy in this truth. Your life is a prayer, not spoken in a cathedral, but etched into the furrows of the earth. A desperate plea for the harvest to come, for the winter to be kind. Was it faith that saved them, or the simple grinding necessity of survival that stripped away every choice save one? To endure. Their fears were primal, the wolf in the dark woods, the bandit on the road, the devil whispering temptations into their dreams, the sudden onset of a plague that swept through a village faster than a summer storm. Yet the true master of their existence was not some external threat, but the very system they had built to protect themselves. This castle, this feudal society, it was a vast, grinding machine, designed for one purpose: survival. The horn blasts, a raw, ancient sound that slices through the chill of the fading day, echoing off the stone walls of the keep. The last rays of the sun, thin and red like spilled blood, surrender to the encroaching gloom. You stand among the others, your breath misting in the cold, watching as the final stragglers rush across the drawbridge, their hurried steps a frantic drumbeat against the planks. The air thickens with anticipation, a collective held breath. Then, the last scraps of stale bread have been gnawed. The communal bowls are scraped clean, the dogs already fighting over stray crumbs beneath the trestle table. The fire, once a roaring heart, now settles into a low, smoldering glow, casting long, dancing shadows across the rough stone walls. Outside, the world dissolves into an inky blackness, a thick, impenetrable blanket that smothers all sound. There are no flickering screens here, no electric hum, no infinite scroll. There is only the dying warmth, the scent of wood smoke, and the relentless, echoing expanse of time. Grandeur is always built on a foundation of grit and sweat, on the backs and blistered hands of the forgotten. Think of the unseen server farms that hum with forgotten power, powering our digital world, or the intricate logistical chains that stock our supermarkets with endless bounty, the modern iterations of these very kitchens. We praise the innovators, the knights, the visionaries, but we so often forget the sweltering, high-pressure kitchens, where their visions are made real, the uncredited toil that ensures another sunrise. This reveals a profound, unvarnished truth about human nature, a thread running unbroken through the ages. We have always been, and perhaps always will be, more concerned with the perception of order than with order itself. We still practice this today, perhaps with a more cunning hand. We spray air fresheners to hide the lingering household smells, rather than scrubbing the source. We wield corporate jargon to obscure difficult truths and inconvenient realities in the workplace. Political spin, slick and pervasive, perfumes the ugliest, most unsavory realities, making them palatable, even desirable. It's a subtle reminder that order, not individual will, is the greatest bulwark against the howling wilderness beyond the walls. A world where wolves, and literal wolves, famine and plague vie for dominance. Ask yourself, would you survive without choice? Or bend just enough to fit the mold? It was a harsh tutor, but one that forced nations to confront their structural weaknesses head-on, pushing them towards more flexible exchange rate systems and more cautious, sustainable debt management practices. You now understand why central banks worldwide maintain robust foreign exchange reserves, and why prudential financial regulation is not just bureaucratic red tape, but a vital, often invisible shield against future crises. This journey reminds us that financial markets are not just cold equations and abstract numbers. They are deeply intertwined with human psychology, with irrational exuberance and paralyzing fear, with unbounded greed and cascading panic. You watch as IMF-mandated austerity programs, designed to stabilize economies, paradoxically cut vital social safety nets and public services. A stark historical fact from this era is the widespread public anger in countries like Indonesia and Thailand, where these strict conditions fueled mass protests and riots, leading to significant political unrest and the downfall of governments. A lesser-known detail was the emergence of informal, neighborhood-level bartering systems, where people exchanged goods and skills without money, a poignant throwback to pre-industrial times, revealing the depths of the cash crunch. The IMF's rationale was simple. Countries needed to get their financial houses in order, even if it hurt. You would see governments compelled to enact severe fiscal austerity, meaning deep cuts to public spending on everything from infrastructure projects to social services, often leading to immediate job losses and reduced welfare for citizens. Interest rates skyrocketed to astronomical levels, sometimes over 20%, designed to stabilize currencies by attracting foreign capital, but simultaneously crushing domestic businesses and making borrowing impossibly expensive for everyday people. For nations like Thailand, this wasn't just a slight imbalance. By the mid-1990s, Thailand's current account deficit had swelled to over 8% of its GDP, a figure that sent shivers down the spines of many seasoned economists, signaling a deeply precarious financial position. Adding to this precariousness was the danger of currencies pegged to a strengthening US dollar. Many of these fast-growing Asian economies had fixed their exchange rates to the US dollar. Sounds stable, right? But imagine tying your small boat to a supertanker that's suddenly picking up speed. To live a life of such immense, back-breaking labor, of such constant precarity, only to dissolve into the earth, leaving behind no grand testament to your existence. Yet there is also a stark beauty. What does it mean truly to live a life whose meaning is found not in personal achievement, but in collective endurance? Your existence whispers a truth that our frantic, self-obsessed world struggles to hear. That a life's deepest meaning might not be found in what we achieve for ourselves, what monuments we erect, what fame we grasp, but in what we endure for others. But in doing so, have we lost something profound? A deep instinctual respect for natural cycles, for the relentless rhythm of light and shadow? The medieval peasant's fear of the dark was a constant, raw reminder of human vulnerability, of our small, precarious place in a vast, untamed cosmos. Our perpetual light gives us a sense of mastery, a comforting illusion of control. But ask yourself, is it truly mastery, or merely a blinding distraction from the deep, primal unknown that still hums beneath the surface of our modern, bright world? It was the work that turned raw produce into the food that staved off starvation, raw wool into the clothing that shielded against the biting cold, and crying infants into future laborers for the next generation. The modern conversation about invisible labor, the unacknowledged work that keeps a household running, the hidden engine of society, was, for the medieval woman, simply life. It wasn't a concept to be debated or studied. It was a harsh reality to be endured from before sunrise to long after sunset. A quiet sacrifice whispered to the saints in the dark. Is it a taste you would even recognize, or is it merely another luxury, as distant and ephemeral as the whisper of a saint's name in a storm? Existential dread, the quiet gnawing fear of meaninglessness or the vastness of the unknown, is a luxury for those with idle hands, with minds unfettered by immediate, tangible threats. Your dread is immediate, physical, and profoundly practical. Will the plow break on that hidden rock? Will the ox go lame before the fields are sown? Will you yourself have the strength, the sheer, brute will to do this again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until the frost claims the land once more? It is forged in the eyes of others. The Lord's reeve who tallies your labor, the priest who judges your soul's piety or lack thereof, the wife who knows the weariness in your bones without a word, because she shares it. We, in our modern world, spend our lives trying to find ourselves. For you there is nothing to find. You are here. The work is there. The separation, the concept of a self distinct from your duty, is a luxury you cannot imagine. They were built, ostensibly, to keep death out, to hold back the wolf at the door, the raider's sword, the chill of winter's breath. But in their enduring strength, they became something more, elaborate tombs for the living. Each person within, from the highest lord to the lowliest scullery maid, was, in a sense, entombed in their designated role. Lord, lady, knight, servant, all were prisoners of the same formidable structure, their lives meticulously dictated by the unyielding logic of the stone. We seek the safety of the battlements, but in doing so, do we not risk becoming prisoners of our own fortifications, losing touch with the vital, often uncomfortable, world outside? Ask yourself, when you wall yourself off for safety, what part of yourself do you also entomb? We pride ourselves on the impartiality of our modern legal systems, on their intricate safeguards and appeals. Yet even today, they are still shaped by the biases and power structures of our society, often feeling just as remote and incomprehensible to those caught within their labyrinthine processes, just as cold and absolute as a medieval lord's verdict. Ask yourself, when the alternative is chaos, does swift, brutal order become a grim kind of comfort, or simply a cage you're born into. This chaotic, high-stakes environment was in truth the true engine room of the castle, the heart that pumped lifeblood into every corner of the medieval world. Consider the monumental feat. Feeding over 100 people, sometimes many more, 3 times a day, with no refrigeration, no instant communication, and ingredients dictated by the caprice of the harvest or the success of the hunt. This kitchen reveals the raw, unglamorous labor that underpins all civilizations, the kind that never gets a fresco painted in its honor. A wealthy lord, bedecked in velvet and ermine, was considered clean, not because he plunged into a daily bath, an unthinkable luxury for most, and often seen as weakening the humors, but because his clothes were of the finest make, his linens bleached, and he could afford the exotic, precious perfumes and spices from the distant East. His cleanliness was a projection of wealth, a privilege, a perfumed lie. You are a pair of hands, a strong back, a cog in a great cold machine designed to endure. This unceasing communal existence, far from fostering intimacy, could often breed a weary anonymity. You might never truly know the names or histories of those sharing your breath, only their function. The ringing of the morning bells from the chapel isn't just a call to prayer, it's the beat of the castle's heart, a pulse of routine that through its relentless rhythm promises another day of existence. Currencies, like people, need strong, flexible foundations to weather sudden storms, and fixed pegs without robust backing are like glass jaws in a boxing match. The interconnectedness of our world also means that a financial tremor in one market can swiftly become a global earthquake, demanding unprecedented international cooperation and vigilance from policymakers. The long-term consequences of this shattered honeymoon were immense, fundamentally reshaping global economic policy, leading to the strengthening of financial regulations across emerging markets and fostering a healthier skepticism towards unbridled short-term capital flows. While we've discussed the macroeconomic policy for millions across the region, this financial collapse was a brutal personal reckoning. Factories once humming with activity now stand eerily silent, their gates locked, leading to skyrocketing unemployment. Entire communities built around single industries crumble as mass bankruptcies sweep through, from the largest corporations to the corner hawker stall. The ripple effect is devastating. Families plunged into poverty, often forced to sell every possession just to put food on the table. This tragedy was compounded by the prescribed remedies. As the regional crisis spiraled into full-blown panic, with currencies plummeting and businesses collapsing across Southeast Asia, a familiar global player stepped onto the stage, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF. You can imagine them like the world's financial firefighters, but instead of water, their hoses sprayed multi-billion-dollar bailout packages for Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea. This was, at the time, the largest financial rescue operation in history, signaling the sheer scale of the meltdown. But as with any major rescue by the IMF, there were incredibly strict conditions attached, collectively known as conditionality. As you start peeling back the layers of this supposed miracle, you begin to reveal the unseen structural cracks forming beneath the surface. A glaring red flag was the unsustainable buildup of large current account deficits. Think of a country's current account like its national credit card statement. If you're consistently importing far more than you're exporting, or borrowing heavily from abroad to finance your spending, that deficit grows. It is the enduring fertility of the land, coaxed from its stubbornness by your sweat and unending effort, that speaks your name in a language older than words. You are part of a chain, an unbroken, weary, yet utterly vital link that stretches back to the first humans who knelt to scratch a furrow in the earth. Your purpose was not to be remembered as an individual, but simply to perpetuate the human chain, to pass the farmable strip and the crushing obligation onto the next generation. There is a profound melancholy in this truth, is there not? This omnipresent fear wasn't just a quaint superstition. It was a daily, visceral reality that dictated every waking hour, shaping the very architecture of their lives, the clustering of homes, the early bedtimes, the absolute necessity of a shared hearth. We, in our perpetually illuminated world, bathed in the artificial glow of cities that never sleep, find little of that ancient terror. Night for us is a time for entertainment, for work, for travel, a playground, not a peril. We believe we have conquered the dark, pushed back its boundaries with our electric might. Her work is not measured in a single heroic task like plowing a straight furrow, but in 1,000 small, essential, and invisible ones. The tiny, crucial victories that keep the flicker of life from extinguishing. History is often told through the deeds of men, kings, knights, and farmers. Their names etched into scrolls, their battles recounted in sagas. But the true, quiet survival of this world rested squarely on the shoulders of women. Their labor, less visible and rarely recorded, was the bedrock of the entire economy, the very foundation upon which every kingdom was built. It is the primal recognition that your bones ache with the same dull throb, that your hands are as calloused, your future as uncertain as theirs. It is a profound, unspoken covenant. We endure together because we must. This bond, deeper than friendship, more primal than affection, is the shared sentence of their lives. Ask yourself, in a life defined by such fundamental grinding need, where even basic hydration is a calculated risk, what does true freedom taste like? But here, in the cold mud and biting wind of the 13th century, this is not a choice. It is a destiny, a preordained sentence passed down through generations. The toil is so complete, so all-consuming, that it leaves little room for abstract thought, for existential musings, for the luxury of philosophy. Your body becomes a tool, subject to the same wear and tear, the same inevitable breakdown as the plow itself. Your hands are gnarled, your joints ache with a chronic pain that settles deep into your bones, a constant companion. Your name, a simple Thomas or Agnes, is a convenience, a sound to call you to your task, but your function is everything. You are a pair of hands to guide a plow through stubborn earth, a back to haul stone for the Lord's new wall, a stomach to fill just enough to keep the engine running. In this world, identity isn't forged in the mirror of self-reflection. There are no mirrors, save for a still puddle on a good day, quickly muddied by a clumsy foot. The fire sinks back to embers. The sounds of sleep deepen, the rhythmic breaths of the household finally finding peace in the deep night. The great stone walls hold the silence, a profound quiet that has settled here for 1,000 years. For 1,000 years, these cold, silent stones have stood, not just as fortifications against the wild and the hostile, but as a monument to a profound human need for order in a chaotic world. The very security you crave isolates you from the vibrant, messy, unpredictable pulse of humanity below. It's an ironic tragedy. The more fortified you make your existence, the more removed you become from the very essence of life. Was it true power they sought, or merely an illusion of safety that warped their perception of reality? This dilemma echoes into our own age. We build gated communities, curate our information feeds, create exclusive social circles. You watch as the accused is dragged away, the dull thud of the first flogging echoing in the hall, a percussive beat to the Lord's unassailable power. It seems arbitrary, cruel to your modern sensibilities, a grim dance between fear and submission. Yet, it was the only system they knew, a direct, understandable form of power that, for all its flaws, provided a resolution. It reminds us that all systems of justice are human inventions, forged not in divine wisdom, but in the practical, often brutal, values of their time. One moment he is tasting, a critical frown marring his brow. The next he is yelling, a torrent of sharp commands cutting through the steam. He orchestrates this inferno, a living, breathing engine, where every chop, every stir, every measured portion contributes to the great, unspoken pact of survival. Yet from this very crucible of sweat and fire comes the sustenance that binds everyone within these stone walls. From the lord feasting in his grand hall to the lowest stable boy shivering in the straw, it is the fuel that keeps the bells ringing, the swords sharp, the children growing. That concept, the invisible battalions of sickness that truly laid waste to the realm, did not exist in their world. It was about managing appearances and smells. Cleanliness was a visual and olfactory illusion, a performance staged for the discerning eye and nose. The true fear isn't the cold, but the thought that the fire might not be relit, that the routine might break, that the fragile order holding back the darkness might finally shatter. Today, we build our homes for personal comfort and self-expression, sanctuaries of the individual. But here, the self is subsumed. The castle is the entity. You are just a cell within it, performing your function. Your identity is not what you think or feel, but what you do for the continuation of this stone world. The major historical fact that cemented these lessons was the rapid, almost instantaneous spread of financial contagion following the initial devaluation of the Thai baht in July 1997, demonstrating how interconnected and vulnerable the global financial system had become. As the dust settles on this intense period of financial turbulence, you're left with profound insights that echo far beyond the 1990s. The key takeaways are clear and enduring. The pursuit of rapid, often debt-fueled growth at the expense of sound economic fundamentals is a dangerous gamble that invites disaster. Rather than a direct government handout, the Fed orchestrated a private bailout. They convened a meeting of 14 major financial institutions, essentially strong-arming them into injecting $3.6 billion to prevent LTCM's disorderly unwinding. Economists continue to debate whether this intervention set a dangerous precedent, rewarding excessive risk-taking, or if it was an absolutely necessary move to avert a full-blown global financial meltdown. This financial shock wasn't just about balance sheets. It amplified into a complete economic and social meltdown, sparking widespread protests, food riots, and ultimately the end of Suharto's 32-year authoritarian rule. Economists still debate the precise tipping point where a financial crisis transformed into a full-scale political revolution. But one thing is clear. Indonesia's collapse was a brutal testament to how interconnected finance and governance truly are. This unchecked capital flow, while driving growth, also inflated asset bubbles and created significant vulnerabilities. Economists still debate the extent to which the Washington Consensus, with its fervent push for deregulation and open capital accounts, laid the groundwork for future instability, rather than simply guiding prosperity. It was a golden age, but one built on foundations that, in hindsight, might have been less solid than they appeared. It is an invisible inheritance, passed not through parchment and seals, but through muscle and blood, through the very earth itself. Look at your son, his back strengthening for the plow. That strength, that enduring will, is your legacy. Every stone cleared from the unforgiving field, one by one, decade after decade, is a tiny, forgotten testament to your persistence. The faint, almost imperceptible improvement of the soil, made richer by generations of your family's manure and turning, year after fallow year, is your quiet masterpiece. The devil and his demons are thought to be most powerful after the sun has set, when the boundary between worlds thins like frost. To be caught out in the dark is to risk not just your body to a hungry beast or a brutal bandit, but your very soul to eternal damnation. Every rustle of leaves, every branch scraping the thatch roof, becomes a potential harbinger of evil. A silent prayer becomes a constant refrain, a desperate plea for protection. For the morning light that feels an eternity away. In the summer, when the sun beats down with a merciless fury, she will join you in the fields for the harvest. Her labor, then, is as vital as any man's, bending over the swathes of grain, her hands bleeding from the sharp stubble, sweat stinging her eyes. Yet her exhaustion is a quiet hum beneath the louder noise of the men's toil, less seen, less acknowledged. Survival dictates a slow, deliberate rhythm, each mouthful chewed into oblivion, every nutrient extracted. Across the patchwork quilt of the Lord's field, other figures mirror your movements. A father sips his ale, his gaze distant. A mother tears a crust for her child, her knuckles white. There are no words exchanged, no elaborate greetings, just the silent, knowing nods. This is not the community of choice, of shared hobbies, or easy laughter. This is a fellowship forged in the crucible of ceaseless labor, bound by the unyielding grip of the land and the arbitrary whims of harvest or plague. For 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day, the sermon of the plow is the only one you hear. Its message is simple, brutal, and ceaseless. You are small, and the work is vast. You are a cog in a machine of survival, a living extension of the very tool you guide. We now, in our gilded cages of light and information, romanticize physical labor as an escape from our digital prisons, a way to reconnect with the earth. We seek it as a choice, a mindful practice. And you hear the wind whistling through the daub and wattle walls, a constant reminder of the world's indifference, a cold finger tracing the outlines of your fragile existence. Your first conscious thought is not of love, or God, or yourself. It is a simple, brutal calculation. There is not enough wood for the fire, and the morning gruel will be thin. This is the first truth of your existence. You are not an individual pursuing happiness. You are a component in a family survival machine. Perhaps the true bedrock of human contentment has always been this disarmingly simple formula: the warmth of a fire, the comfort of food, the security of safety, and the unyielding, quiet rhythm of a life that merely, stubbornly continues. Was this endurance born of resignation? Or did they find a profound dignity in the simple act of living, day by day, breath by breath, beneath the dreams of straw and stone? The true insight here is how deeply this isolation permeates the psyche of the medieval elite. A lord or lady, secure in their fortress, might know more of the celestial spheres than the struggles of a farmer who tills the land just beyond their moat. The castle, built to defy the chaos of the age, unwittingly creates its own, more subtle form of vulnerability. There is a profound melancholy in this vantage point. You hold dominion over lives you barely touch, whose joys and sorrows are rendered insignificant by distance and stone. Then the Lord speaks, his voice a low, resonant rumble. One man, the accuser, will receive a small compensation, a paltry sum to soothe his outrage. The other, the thief, will feel the lash. The verdict is delivered without flourish, absolute and final. It is less about discovering the ethereal truth of the matter, and more about reasserting the Lord's absolute authority, a visceral reminder of who holds the strings of life and livelihood. Justice is not an ideal here. It is a tool, wielded to maintain social cohesion, however brutally. Carcasses, stripped bare or still bristling with bristles, a pig here, a half-flayed deer there, hang from hooks like macabre decorations, dripping onto the well-trodden stone floor. A frantic, sweaty ballet of cooks and scullions unfolds, a blur of flour-dusted aprons and soot-stained hands. At the epicenter of this controlled chaos stands the master cook, a titan of grease and authority. He wields a long-handled ladle, not merely as a tool, but as a scepter, his voice a booming drumbeat over the din. The smell here is a physical blow, a concentrated essence of countless human lives, unwashed, unbreathed. It hits you with a force that makes your stomach clench. The air in the castle is a constant, desperate battle. It's a war waged between the cloying sweetness of herbs, mint, lavender, rosemary, scattered with hopeful, desperate intent across the filth, and the raw, unyielding, underlying stench of life, birth, death, and decay that seeps from every corner. Medieval hygiene, you come to understand, was not about eliminating germs. Its inhabitants are secondary, a fleeting population of blood and breath, destined to live and die within walls that will outlive their great-grandchildren. Your personal existence is a flicker against the immense, indifferent weight of the stone. In an age without clocks, time is measured by the light in the arrow-slit windows and the gnawing in your belly. Survival isn't a goal, it's the rhythm of your every breath. This cold awakening isn't a hardship. It is simply the beginning of another day, the same as all the others. $C because the interest rates were lower, only to see the Thai baht plummet by half. Overnight, their debt obligation effectively doubled, pushing countless otherwise solvent enterprises into bankruptcy. This devastating real-world impact on ordinary citizens, caught in a global financial tsunami, is a poignant, often overlooked detail. Furthermore, the crisis brutally exposed the perils of weak financial supervision. Banks, operating with lax oversight, engaged in reckless lending, inflating asset bubbles destined to burst. Economists continue to debate the precise degree to which outright corruption versus simple regulatory inertia allowed these vulnerabilities to fester. You see, LTCM was no ordinary fund. It was famously staffed by 2 Nobel laureates in economics, Myron Scholes and Robert Merton, creators of the Black-Scholes option pricing model. The notion that such brilliant minds, armed with sophisticated models, could be brought to their knees by real-world chaos was a profound shock to the system. It was like watching a supercomputer fail because someone spilled coffee on the keyboard. With LTCM facing collapse and potentially triggering a domino effect across the financial system, a systemic failure, the New York Federal Reserve had to step in. This fragility, coupled with deep-seated political instability under the Suharto regime, created an environment ripe for disaster. The government's initial, hesitant responses, often seen as protecting vested interests, only fueled public panic and capital flight. One quirky detail that really underscores the severity. At its peak, the Indonesian rupiah lost over 80% of its value against the dollar. Imagine needing a wheelbarrow full of rupiah just to buy a loaf of bread. It was like monopoly money in real time. This wasn't just corporate investment. It was speculative money chasing real estate booms and burgeoning stock markets. The prevailing optimism was bolstered by the Washington Consensus, an influential set of economic policy recommendations that championed financial liberalization, privatization, and fiscal discipline as the undisputed path to prosperity. It felt like a global endorsement for their chosen trajectory. However, even amidst the euphoria, subtle cracks began to appear. Interestingly, in Thailand, a new term emerged called chai dan, which roughly translates to overborrowing from foreigners, reflecting a cultural awareness, perhaps even a slight unease, about the rapid influx of external funds. Your hands have shaped mud into bricks, not cathedrals. Your voice has sung lullabies, not epic poems. Your thoughts have been focused on the next meal, the next harvest, the next surviving child, not philosophical treatises. Your life, by our measure, will vanish almost without a trace, a single, forgotten ripple in a vast ocean of human existence. But this modern obsession misses the silent, profound truth of your existence. Your legacy is not found in what is remembered, but in what continues. The world you know shrinks to these four walls, a fragile island against an ocean of dread. The forests, the fields, the meandering paths that were your familiar by day become alien and terrifying. They belong to the creatures of the night, to wolves whose howls now seem closer, to outlaws whose presence is a living shadow, and to things far, far worse. The very air outside is believed to teem with them, the unquiet dead, the whispering sprites, and the legions of the damned. Mending your tunic, patched a dozen times, or stitching a worn blanket for the children, her needle is a constant, quiet hum. Water, heavy and cold, is fetched from the well, bucket by bucket, 100 journeys a year, each one a testament to the basic need for life. The children, sticky-fingered and curious, are always underfoot, their cries and giggles weaving into the fabric of her day. And always the food, kneading the heavy dough, stirring the thick stew, ensuring the precious caloric intake that fuels your own back-breaking work. It is hydration in a world where the running stream often carried the invisible curses of dysentery and fever, where the village well might be tainted by the refuse of livestock or the unseen rot of the earth. This low-alcohol ale, brewed from whatever grains could be spared, was safer, a rudimentary filter against the unseen demons of the water. It's not for intoxication, it's for life, a meager caloric boost in a body constantly teetering on the edge of depletion. Every crumb of bread, every bitter drop of ale is counted. The ox strains, its breath clouding in the chill, damp air, a visible testament to its own immense effort. There is no conversation here, only the grunts of exertion from you and your son, the lowing commands to the animal, a language of necessity understood without words. The rhythm is relentless. Heave, push, turn the clumsy beast, and repeat. This is not the noble, sun-drenched labor depicted in illuminated manuscripts, the idealized peasant, a backdrop for noble pursuits. This is a grueling, repetitive, and mind-numbing struggle. It sinks into your bones through the thin wool blanket and the straw-stuffed mattress you share with your wife and youngest child, a tiny furnace of warmth pressed against your side. You don't open your eyes yet. Instead, you listen. You hear the soft shuffling and snorts of the family's prized possession, the ox, separated from you only by a low wicker partition, its breath steaming in the gloom. You hear the shallow, rattling cough of your eldest son sleeping near the dead hearth, the sound that tightens a knot in your stomach with each ragged exhalation. Survival was not merely a goal. It was the ultimate achievement, the quiet legacy passed down through generations. To wake, to work, to eat, to sleep, and to do it all again. This was the unwritten epic of their lives. It is a humbling lens through which to view our own pursuits. Stripped bare of our endless modern distractions, our abstract pursuits of success and fulfillment, what remains? The sounds of the village, a distant dog's bark, the faint echo of a smith's hammer, are muffled, alien. Your life, once inextricably linked to the land and its people, is now dictated by the confines of these ramparts. You are safe from the raiding parties, the plague carried on the wind, the wild beasts of the forest, but you are also cut off, isolated in a gilded stone box. His word is the law within his domain, etched not in scrolls but in the very fabric of daily fear. For these people, tangled in the unyielding tendrils of the feudal system, his judgment is an act of God, or at least his earthly proxy. The theft of a pig, a small thing in the grand tapestry of the kingdom, is a rupture in the delicate order of the village. And order must be restored, swiftly and undeniably. A long silence stretches, broken only by the crackle of the hearth and the ragged breaths of the accused. You are sent to the kitchens to fetch water. The cold, damp air of the castle corridor gives way, abruptly, to a wall of heat, thick with the scent of roasting meat, simmering herbs, and old smoke. It's a physical push, like wading through an unseen current, before the roar of shouting and the clang of metal truly hit you. This is no mere room. It's a vision of hell made tangible. Massive cauldrons, black with centuries of soot, bubble like malefic geysers over open-mouthed fires that devour logs whole. The stench is not merely unpleasant. It is a physical entity, a dense, cloying presence that seems to seep into the very marrow of your bones, a constant companion that never truly leaves your tunic or your hair. As you carry the stinking bundles out, past the rough-hewn tapestries depicting forgotten hunts and the echoing, raucous laughter from the kitchens, you pass the garderobe. It is little more than a stone seat, cold and unyielding, set into a small alcove, with a dark hole opening to the turbulent moat below, or a crude chute running silently down the castle wall. The air smells of old smoke, stale ale, and the close animal scent of 50 unwashed bodies huddled together for warmth and safety. You are in the great hall of a castle, the heart of this stone. As we conclude this deep dive, You've witnessed a classic journey from irrational exuberance to systemic collapse and, eventually, a hard-won, albeit painful, recovery. This entire saga, often dubbed the Shattered Honeymoon, synthesizes critical lessons for anyone navigating the global economy. You see, the inherent fragility of fixed exchange rate regimes stands out. These pegs, once seen as anchors of stability, become vulnerabilities when not supported by robust reserves and fiscal discipline, inviting speculative attacks. A key revelation from this period is the sheer danger of mismatched currency debts. Imagine a small business owner in Bangkok borrowing in US dollar. This wasn't just a local issue. It sent shockwaves through global financial markets, as if a major fault line just ruptured under Wall Street itself. This Russian default delivered a devastating blow to a highly leveraged U.S. hedge fund you might have heard of, Long-Term Capital Management, or LTCM. Their complex trading strategies, which relied heavily on convergence bets, essentially assuming market anomalies would correct themselves, blew up when Russia defaulted, creating divergence instead. This was a ticking time bomb. When the rupiah began its dizzying freefall, these dollar debts effectively exploded in local currency terms, making repayment an impossible fantasy. Compounding this was a weak and poorly regulated banking system, riddled with cronyism and bad loans even before the crisis hit. Many banks were little more than personal piggy banks for the elite, ill-equipped to handle the avalanche of defaults. It's like building a skyscraper on a foundation of sand, then wondering why it crumbles in an earthquake. This was the honeymoon period, a time of seemingly boundless prosperity. You see GDP growth figures that would make most developed nations blush. Thailand's economy, for instance, expanded at an average of over 8% annually for a decade, a major historical fact underpinning this era. The narrative of the Asian economic miracle was everywhere, fueled by a potent cocktail of high domestic savings, export-oriented industrialization, and, crucially, massive inflows of foreign capital. Investors from wealthier nations, drawn by the promise of high returns and stable, often dollar-pegged currencies, poured billions into these economies. Your grave will be a simple mound of earth, soon to be indistinguishable from the others in the crowded churchyard. Our age, a distant echo from your simple, brutal world, is obsessed with leaving a mark. We craft digital identities, chase fleeting fame, and document every meal, every thought, every minor achievement in a desperate bid to be remembered, to carve our name into the transient digital stone of the internet. We speak of personal brands and legacy projects with a fervor that would bewilder you. For what mark could you possibly leave? You are not merely closing a door. You are sealing a pact against the night itself. Inside the low-beamed hut, the small fire, carefully banked, casts dancing shadows that seem to writhe on the mud walls. The familiar shapes of pots and tools become distorted, momentarily alien. Your children huddle close, their small faces reflecting the flickering light, eyes wide, with the stories whispered low by the hearth. For you, darkness is not merely the absence of light. It is a different state of being. The lowing of the goat as she milks it, fingers deftly working, adding another thin stream of life-giving sustenance to the day's stores. Then, her back to the rising sun, she weeds the few rows of vegetables, a crucial variety in the endless monotony of pottage, her hands moving with a practiced, almost ritualistic rhythm against the stubborn earth. Inside, The spinning wheel's ceaseless hum becomes the soundtrack to her hours. Wool, coarse and shorn, transforms under her nimble fingers into thread, a never-ending task that stretches from morning light to the flickering shadows of the evening fire. In her hands, a simple offering, a block of that same dark, gritty bread, coarse with chaff, and perhaps a few unwelcome grains of grit from the miller's stone. If you are fortunate, a sliver of hard, preserved cheese, its saltiness a sharp, fleeting pleasure. Then comes the flask, the leather, worn smooth by generations of toil-stained hands, delivers a draught of small beer. This isn't the merry brew of feast days or celebratory toasts. It's a grim, everyday necessity. Its taste is thin, sour, barely more than an echo of fermented grain. But it is wet. You guide the ox, and your son, a mirror of your own youth, struggles alongside you, his small hands gripping the heavy wooden plow. It is a clumsy, monstrous thing, a brute of oak and sinew. The iron tip, the most valuable part, the very heart of this beast, barely scratches the dense, wet soil. It is a battle, not with a visible foe, but with the earth itself, fought inch by agonizing inch. Your shoulders burn with a fire that never quite extinguishes. Your back screams a silent protest with every forward lurch. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. The cold wakes you first. The cold wakes you before the light. It's not just a temperature. It's a physical presence in your small, one-room hut, a predator that has crept in overnight after the fire died. Your ambitions are not grand monuments, but the simple, profound hope that tomorrow the cook will be generous, and the weather will hold, and your cough will not worsen. This is not a failure of the soul, not a lack of imagination. It is, in fact, a profound triumph of pragmatism. For all the grandiosity of the castle walls, the clamor of its inhabitants, and the violence that often defined its purpose, the overwhelming truth, for most living within its shadow, was a relentless cycle of hard labor, fleeting small comforts, and an astonishing capacity for simple endurance. The village is a cluster of thatched roofs, barely a smudge against the landscape. The peasants, tiny, ant-like figures moving in the distant fields, their lives dictated by There are no learned men in flowing robes, no intricate arguments of law, no jury of peers to weigh the evidence. There is only the Lord, seated upon his carved oak throne, his face as impassive as cold stone beneath his heavy brow. He listens, or appears to, as the accuser wails about his missing sow, and the accused mumbles denials, desperate pleas that fall flat in the cavernous space. The Lord's gaze is not one of inquiry, but of quiet assessment, of power about to be exerted. This is the Lord's justice, immediate and deeply personal. They understand the difference between a siege bell and a Sunday peal, with the same instinct other children learn names of flowers. This constant state of prepared violence shapes souls as much as it shapes walls. Does such a peace truly feel like peace? Or is it merely a prolonged low-grade fever, a quiet hum of terror that becomes the background noise of life itself? Ask yourself, when your survival depends on the readiness to kill, does true compassion stand a chance? Or does it, too, become another casualty of the violent peace? Your fingers, raw and chafed, dig into the floor's foul bedding. You are tasked with emptying the rushes from the great hall, a ritual as old as the stones themselves. They are foul, soaked with spilled ale, clinging grease, discarded bone shards, and the undeniable shark tang of the urine of dogs and occasionally men. Each handful is a weighted, putrid mass that sticks to your skin, a silent testament to the raw, unvarnished life of the castle. You are returned to consciousness by the cold. It's a physical presence, seeping from the stone floor through the thin layer of straw and your woolen blanket. The great fire in the center of the hall is a ghost of embers, its warmth long dead. Around you, the air is thick with the sounds of a shared, unprivate sleep. The wet cough of a man-at-arms, the whimpers of a child, the rustle and scratch of dogs dreaming of the hunt. Economists continue to debate the optimal strategies for managing these flows, whether through speed bumps like capital controls or stronger domestic safeguards, without choking off legitimate investment. This lingering question of how to reap the benefits of global capital without being consumed by its volatility remains a central puzzle for economies worldwide, a constant reminder of 1997's painful tuition fee. As the Asian financial crisis raged, its economic tremors weren't confined to a single continent. You begin to see how quickly instability can cross borders, much like a flu virus on a crowded airplane. The confidence crisis spread, reaching emerging markets far from Southeast Asia. Western investors, spooked by the Asian meltdown, started pulling money out of other risky assets globally. This capital flight hit nations like Russia particularly hard. And then, in August 1998, the inevitable happened. Russia defaulted on its debt, devalued the ruble, and declared a moratorium on payments by commercial banks to foreign creditors. As the contagion ripped through Southeast Asia, if you thought other nations were struggling, Indonesia wasn't just struggling, it was plunging into a perfect storm. We're talking about a situation where multiple catastrophic elements converged, turning a financial tremor into a full-blown societal earthquake. You see, the nation was saddled with massive private sector debt, much of it denominated in US dollars. Indonesian corporations, tempted by low interest rates, borrowed billions from international markets. If you find value in this kind of analysis, consider liking the video and subscribing. It helps more than you know. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from? Or what are your initial thoughts on economic bubbles? Let's dive in and unravel how it all unfolded. As the 1990s dawned, you witness a remarkable phenomenon across Southeast Asia and parts of East Asia. Nations like Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea weren't just growing, they were roaring, earning them the moniker Asian Tigers. He is you, 20 years younger, unbroken by the relentless toil, by the damp chill of countless winters that have brought on the deeper, rasping cough in your own chest. The village knows it. You know it. The bells will toll for you soon enough. 40 winters is a long life for a peasant, an age rarely reached, and you have seen more than 30. There will be no monument, no bard will sing your name, no scholar will ink your story onto parchment. Dusk bleeds across the sky, painting the west in bruised purples and blood oranges. A primal urgency grips your gut, cold as the rising mist. The last crow calls, a ragged tear in the deepening quiet. Your hands, calloused from the day's toil, work with a frantic efficiency, securing the cow, pulling the sheep closer to the hut. The gate creaks shut, a sound swallowed instantly by the encroaching gloom. This isn't just about thieves or wild beasts. It's about the very air, turning thick with unseen malevolence. The first faint light barely stains the eastern sky, but the cottage is already stirring. While you are in the fields, bent to the plow, or swinging the scythe. Your wife is engaged in a different but equally relentless battle. Her domain is the small, smoky heart of the home and the patch of earth just beyond the door, the toft. You hear the soft clatter of the bucket as she tends the chickens, their nervous clucks cutting the dawn silence. The harsh clang of the sext bell slices through the heavy midday air, a temporary reprieve, a short-lived mercy. Your shoulders slump, a bone-deep weariness pulling at your frame as you seek out a patch of ground beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, the damp earth seeping through the worn fabric of your tunic. This brief respite is a sacrament, a moment stolen from the relentless demands of the field. Your wife or daughter approaches, her own face etched with the silent fatigue that binds every soul in the village. This totalizing sense of place creates a powerful, if suffocating, sense of belonging. You know every rock, every gnarled apple tree, every wrinkle on every face in your village. The world beyond your parish is a land of rumor, monsters, and myth, where the distant clang of a stranger's bell holds more menace than music. Your cage, small as it may seem, is also your home, offering a peculiar security in its very limitations. Ask yourself, in a world where your freedom was measured only by the reach of your Lord's gaze, could you find peace in its tight embrace? Welcome to today's historical deep dive, where we peel back the dusty veil of time to live a moment in a world both utterly alien and profoundly human. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague, and the only doctor you know might also be the village barber. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a realm of stark beauty, brutal reality, and an unshakable grip of the unseen. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. Tonight, within the cold, echoing shell of the stone castle, you are simply a bundle of bone and muscle, seeking the deepest rest. Your dreams, when they come, are not of knightly glory or chests brimming with gold. Such fantasies are the luxury of minstrels and poets, not the reality of cold mornings and empty stomachs. No, your dreams are tangible, visceral. They are the phantom warmth of a full belly, the kind that settles deep and banishes the gnawing hunger. They are the promise of a morning without the biting, bone-deep ache of a winter chill. You climb to the battlements, the wind whipping at your cloak. The rough stone scrapes beneath your gloved hand, cold even through the leather. The air up here is thin, sharp with the scent of distant wood smoke and the promise of rain. Below, the world unfolds like a crumpled map, a vast canvas painted in shades of muted green and ochre. From this height, this man-made mountain of stone, you truly see the dominion of the castle, a neat patchwork of fields, carefully tilled and bordered, stretching like a quilt towards the menacing, tangled edge of the great forest. The air in the Lord's Hall hangs thick with the scent of damp earth and simmering fear. You stand pressed against the rough-hewn pillars, one of many villagers drawn by the grim theater unfolding. Before the dais, two men, peasants like yourself, are bound. Their faces are a study in desperation, one accusing, his voice raw with indignation, the other defiance warring with terror in his eyes. He is accused of stealing a pig, a creature of vital fat and future broods, a theft not just of property, but of potential survival. We forget that the rule of law is often just a sophisticated system of controlled, legitimate violence. The clanging in the bailey is a raw, unvarnished reminder that order is never freely given. It is always enforced, always asserted. The very air you breathe within these walls is heavy with the promise of bloodshed, a promise that keeps the wolves from the gate, but also keeps a part of you perpetually vigilant, perpetually afraid. Think of the children born into this. They learn to identify the war horn before they learn their letters. We are the lords of our own digital halls, carefully staging our successes and diligently hiding our failures, constantly aware of the unseen audience whose judgment shapes our sense of self. We pursue a curated image, yet they lived a public identity not by choice, but by absolute necessity. Ask yourself, in a world where your very existence was a public performance, would you find a quiet corner of self? Or would you become so attuned to the whispers that your own voice, your own true reflection, would eventually fade? Welcome to today's historical deep dive. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. You don't wake up, you see. A nation essentially picks 2 out of 3, a fixed exchange rate, an independent monetary policy, or free capital movement. Trying for all 3, as many Asian economies had, proved disastrous when confidence evaporated. Perhaps the most profound shift happened within institutions like the IMF. Once staunch advocates for fully open capital accounts, the raw lessons of the Asian crisis led to a seismic re-evaluation. It was a bit like realizing that while an open door is great for welcoming guests, it's also perfect for a swift, unceremonious exit when things get dicey. But at the time, it was an unprecedented gamble, setting Malaysia on a solitary path. It was less a calculated risk assessment and more of a financial stampede. Economists continue to debate the exact point at which rational fundamentals ended and irrational panic truly took over. But for the nations caught in the crosshairs, the distinction was academic. The sickness had spread, turning perceived vulnerabilities into full-blown crises across the region. Welcome to today's deep dive into one of the most pivotal financial events of the late 20th century, the Asian financial crisis. You know that feeling when everything's going perfectly, almost too perfectly, and you just know something's about to give? That's exactly the vibe we're exploring today, but on a massive international scale. We're talking about economies hailed as miracles suddenly facing collapse, currencies plummeting, and millions of lives upended. It's a story of ambition, miscalculation, and the interconnectedness of our global financial system, showing how quickly a seemingly invincible boom can turn into a bust.